Tonight, we're walking into the quietest town in Kanto, the one every trainer remembers and nobody likes to talk about, and we're going to sit with everything the world has never been able to explain about it, the darkest unsolved mysteries of Lavender Town. For those of you who've been drifting off with us night after night, thank you for making this channel part of your evenings. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here, and if this is your first night, just comment day 1. Now, let's begin. There is a place on the eastern side of the Kanto region where the roads stop being roads and start being approaches. You feel it before you see it. Route 8 climbs out of the underground path from Saffron, and the air changes, thins, cools, carries a faint mineral smell like the inside of an old church. Route 12 unrolls to the south, along the water, wooden fishing platforms creaking on their pilings, the sea breathing in and out beneath the boards. Route 10 falls away to the north, past the humming shell of the power plant, down through the mouth of Rock Tunnel, where the dark is total, and the Zubats hang in their thousands, like folded coats. 3 roads, 3 directions, and all of them lead, eventually, to the same small cluster of houses on a hill, and to the tower that stands above them. The sign at the edge of town is polite. It always struck me as strange how polite it is. Lavender Town, it reads. The noble purple town. Nothing about what the town is for. Nothing about the graves, just a color and a compliment, painted in neat letters, standing at the top of the road like a hostess who has decided not to mention the thing in the next room. Everything in Lavender Town is that same shade. The roofs are purple. The walls are a dusty violet gray that seems to hold the light rather than reflect it. Even the ground has a lavender cast to it, as though the soil itself has taken on the color of whatever grows here, or whatever was buried here. There are only a handful of buildings. A Poke Center with its familiar red roof, looking oddly cheerful, like a single lit window in a dark street. A Pokemart. A few houses with their curtains drawn. A small building with a hand-painted sign that reads, Volunteer Pokémon House. And then the tower. The Pokémon Tower is 7 stories tall, and it is the only building in Kanto whose purpose is grief. Not commerce, not competition, not research. Grief. It rises out of the middle of the town like a chimney, narrow and pale, and every floor of it is a graveyard. Not a graveyard in the way we might picture one, with grass and low walls and the sound of traffic somewhere beyond the hedge, but a vertical graveyard, stacked, interior, indoor. Tombstones on carpet, rows of them in the dim, arranged in patterns you can walk between, each one marking a Pokémon that lived and died and was carried up those stairs by someone who loved it. Think about that for a moment, because the games never slow down long enough to let you. In a world where children of 10 are handed a partner and sent out into the tall grass, where the entire economy and culture and mythology of a civilization is built on the bond between a person and a creature, there has to be a place where those bonds end. There has to be somewhere the story goes when it stops. In Kanto, that somewhere is a single tower in a single small town, and the town is so small that you can walk from one end of it to the other in about the time it takes to think of a reason not to. The Japanese name of the town tells you more than the English one does. In Japanese, it is Shion Town. Shion is a flower, the Tatarian aster, a pale purple bloom that comes up in late autumn when almost everything else is finished. In the old language of flowers, the quiet code that Japanese poetry and art have used for centuries, Shion carries a very specific message. It means remembrance. It means I will not forget you. That is the name of the town. Not lavender, not a decorative color chosen for the tiles. A flower that blooms after the season has ended, given as a promise to the dead that they will be remembered. And that changes the whole shape of the place, doesn't it? The town is not a haunted house. The town is a promise. It exists because somebody, at some point in the history of Kanto, decided that the creatures who fight beside us and sleep at the foot of our beds deserve a building with their names in it. Everything frightening about Lavender Town grows out of that decision, out of the fact that people keep their promise, even when the thing they promised to remember refuses to stay quiet, because the town is not quiet. That is the first mystery, and it is the one that sits underneath all the others. In every other settlement in Kanto, life presses in on you. Pewter has the sound of chisels and the museum's echo. Cerulean has water running through it, in fountains and rivers and the gym's endless pools. Vermilion has gulls and ship horns and the diesel thrum of the harbor. Celadon has crowds. Saffron has the hum of the Sylph building, 60 stories of air conditioning and ambition. Fuchsia has the safari's insects. Cinnabar has the volcano's low subsonic complaint. The the kind of sound you feel in your teeth rather than hear. Lavender has almost nothing, a little wind. The faint sound of a door closing somewhere, and underneath it, threaded through everything, a melody that has become one of the most argued about pieces of music in the history of video games, which we will come to when the night has settled a little deeper and you are further from the surface than you are now. For now, walk with me up the hill. It is late afternoon in this town, always, in the way that certain places seem permanently stuck in 1 hour. The light comes in low and sideways. The houses cast long shadows across the path. There are people in Lavender Town, and if you stop and talk to them, you notice something that took me an embarrassingly long time to notice, which is that almost nobody in this town says anything ordinary. In Viridian, people tell you about catching Pokémon. In Cerulean, they tell you about the gym. In Lavender, they tell you what they've seen. One resident tells you the town is a place of eternal rest, plainly, without decoration, the way a person tells you the weather. Another tells you that ghosts have been appearing in the tower lately, and that they are frightened. Another mentions, almost in passing, that white hands have been seen on people's shoulders in there. A child tells you there is a ghost that has no name. A man tells you a story about the Marowak. An old woman tells you she used to hear the tower at night, and now she hears it in the day too. There is no chorus of skeptics in Lavender Town. There is no man in the corner rolling his eyes at superstition. Everyone in this town agrees that something is happening in the tower, and their disagreements are only about what it wants. That is not how ordinary towns talk about their ghost stories. Ordinary towns have a believer and a doubter and a joke to break the tension. Lavender doesn't have the joke. And the reason Lavender doesn't have the joke, I think, is that in this town the evidence walked out of the tower and into the street a long time ago, and after that there was nothing left to argue about. Let me take you inside. The first floor of the Pokémon Tower is the only floor that looks like a building rather than a haunting. There is a desk. There are people who work here, or who volunteer here, tending to things. There is even a small shop counter of sorts, someone selling the little items a mourner might need. And there is a strange, almost domestic warmth to it, the warmth of a place where staff have worked so long among the dead that the dead have become colleagues. They will tell you where to go. They will tell you to be respectful. They will not tell you to leave. You climb, and the building sheds its warmth 1 floor at a time. The second floor is where the tombstones begin, and the first thing that strikes you is the writing on them. If you stop to read them, and I want you to imagine stopping to read them, taking your time, the way you would in a real cemetery, when the person you came with has wandered ahead, you find that they are not grand. There is no poetry carved into these stones. There are no dates of great battles. The inscriptions are the smallest, plainest, most devastating things imaginable. Here lies a Rattata. Here lies a Pidgey. Signed, here lies a Nidoran. Beloved friend. Faithful partner. Rest in peace. A Rattata. Think about which Pokémon are buried in this tower. Not legends. Not the sleeping titans under the seafloor, or the birds that live inside thunderstorms. Rattata, Pidgey, Spearow. The creatures are 10-year-old catchers on Route 1 in the first hour of a journey, the ones an experienced trainer might not even bother to throw a ball at. This tower is full of ordinary lives. It is a monument to the small ones. Somebody's first catch, somebody's only catch. A Pidgey that flew beside a child through Viridian Forest and got old the way small animals get old, quickly and without much warning, and then was carried up a hill in a box by someone who couldn't stop crying in front of the desk on the first floor. That is what the Pokémon Tower actually is, underneath every ghost story ever told about it. It is the place where the franchise admits that Pokémon die, not faint, not get sent to a box, die. And it admits it in the gentlest possible way, with tidy rows and soft carpet, and a caretaker who keeps the floors clean, which somehow makes it land harder than any horror could. You keep climbing. By the third floor, the atmosphere has changed, and you feel it in the way you feel, a change of pressure before rain. The lights are dimmer, the rows of stones are longer, and now there are people standing among them, and these are the ones the town talks about in lowered voices, the channelers. They stand in white robes, perfectly still, facing the graves. They do not react when you come up the stairs. They do not turn. In a world where every trainer within eyeshot will lock eyes with you across a field and demand a battle, the channelers do not see you at all, because they are not looking outward. They are mediums. Their entire practice is the deliberate opening of themselves to whatever is in this building, the willing loan of a body to something that no longer has one, and they perform it standing up, in silence, in the dark, on the third floor of a tower, in a town of 6 houses. And then one of them turns around, and the encounter that follows is one of the strangest things in the whole of Kanto. Because the channeler does have Pokémon, and she will send them out and she will fight you. But there is something wrong with her, and the game tells you so. Her eyes are described as unfocused, glassy. She speaks in fragments. Some of them do not speak at all. They battle you the way sleepwalkers might battle you, competently and without any evident intention. And when they lose, they come back to themselves slowly, confused, sometimes apologizing, sometimes asking what happened, sometimes saying only that the spirit has left them. Ghosts wear the channelers. That is the mystery of the 3rd and 4th and 5th floors, and it is casually enormous. The tower is not a place where spirits appear at the end of a corridor and vanish when you blink. It is a place where spirits reach out and take hold of human beings, temporarily, routinely, often enough that the residents of the town, 200 meters away, consider it a known local hazard, like a road that floods. And nobody stops it. That is the part that will keep you awake, or would, if we weren't here to do the opposite. There is no organization in Kanto that intervenes, no league official, no researcher with a clipboard. Professor Oak, who will send a 10-year-old across an entire region to fill in an encyclopedia, has nothing to say about the building where the dead put on the living like coats. The channelers are not being rescued from anything, because as far as anyone in Lavender Town is concerned, they are not victims. They are doing a job. Somebody has to listen. Climb higher, and the graves grow older. You can tell by the stones. Some are worn smooth. Some are set slightly out of line, as though the floor beneath them has shifted over decades. The higher floors of the tower are the earlier ones in a sense, the oldest sorrows placed nearest the sky, and the mediums up here are further gone than the ones below, further into whatever it is they let inside. And then, on the 6th floor, the climbing stops, not because there are no more stairs. There are, you can see them, but you cannot reach them, and the reason you cannot reach them is standing in the way. It is a shape, that is all the game will give you. A silhouette in the shape of a Pokémon, roughly, blurred at the edges the way a reflection is blurred on moving water. It does not have a name. The battle screen, which in this world is a machine of perfect certainty, a system that can identify any creature in existence and produce its type, its level, its species, its cry, simply gives up. Where a name should be, it says ghost. Where a level should be, it says nothing at all. Your Pokémon will not attack it, not because they are afraid, although perhaps they are. Because there is nothing there to attack. Every move fails. Every throw of a ball fails. The technology that built the Pokémon League cannot make contact with the thing on the 6th floor of the Pokémon Tower. You have to run, you have to turn around and walk away and leave the tower with the 6th and 7th floors unvisited. And the only reason you know something is wrong up there is that the man from the volunteer Pokémon house never came back. Sit with how unusual that is. The story stops you, not with a locked door, or a guard, or a gate that needs a badge, all of which are ordinary, but with an absence of information. The thing that blocks your path is not too strong. It is unmeasurable. And the solution is not to become stronger, which is the answer to almost every other obstacle in Kanto. The solution is to go and find a way to see. That takes you west, out of Lavender, back through the underground path, into the neon of Celadon City, into a building that could not be less like the tower, the Rocket Game Corner. Cigarette smoke and slot machines and coins clattering into metal trays, a place designed to be so loud and so bright that nobody notices the room behind the poster on the back wall, or the staircase behind the room, or the 4 floors of criminal operation buried beneath the arcade like a cellar under a shop. And in that basement, in the possession of an organized criminal syndicate, is the device that lets you see a ghost, the Sylph Scope. I want to spend a while on the Sylph Scope, because it is one of the most quietly disturbing objects in the entire Pokémon world, and it is usually treated as a key that opens a door. It is a piece of consumer technology. It was made in an office building in Saffron City by a corporation that also makes the balls trainers use and the potions they buy at the counter. Somewhere in the Sylph Company there is a department, with a budget and a manager and a lunch break, whose function is the visual identification of the dead. Which means the dead were a known engineering problem. Somebody wrote a specification. Somebody built a lens and tested it, and to test it they had to take it somewhere haunted and look through it at something that was there, and adjust it, and look again. The Sylph scope is proof that in Kanto, the existence of spirits is not a matter of faith. It is a matter of product development. And the fact that it exists at all, that it works at all, means that everything the channelers do in that tower is not delusion. It is reception. The signal is real enough to focus. And of course, by the time you reach the basement, it is in the hands of Team Rocket, because Team Rocket has arrived in Lavender Town too, and we are going to talk about what they did there, and it is the worst thing anyone does in the first generation of these games. But not yet. Let the night settle a little further first. Come back to the tower with the scope in your bag. Climb the 6 floors again. Past the volunteers. Past the small stones with their small names. Past the mediums standing in the dark with their eyes half closed. Reach the 6th floor. Face the shape. Raise the lens. And the ghost resolves. It is a Marowak, level 30. A Marowak, the bone-wielding Pokémon, the evolved form of Cubone, and she is not a monster. She is a mother, standing between you and the stairs, because the last thing she understood was that something was coming up those stairs to hurt her child, and she has not stopped understanding it. She is furious in the way only the protective dead are furious. She is unreasonable. She cannot be captured, and she cannot be reasoned with, and she cannot be told that the thing she is guarding against has already happened. You have to fight her. And when you win, she does not faint. The word the game uses is different, and it is the reason people still talk about this scene decades later. The Marowak's spirit was put to rest. That is what it says. You did not defeat her, you released her. She stops, and something in the air changes, and the way to the upper floors opens, and there is no reward, no item, no experience worth mentioning, nothing. The only thing you gain by winning that battle is the ability to keep climbing, and the memory of what you had to do to earn it. That, right there, is the beating heart of every dark thing anyone has ever said about Lavender Town. Not the music, not the urban legends that came later, invented on the internet by strangers. The canon, the actual text of the actual game. A child walks into a tower with a corporate ghost-detecting lens, meets the spirit of a mother who was killed defending her orphan child, and has to defeat her in single combat before she will stop screaming. And upstairs, on the 7th floor, when the way is finally clear, there is a room where Team Rocket has set up shop among the graves. Grunts in black standing between the headstones, running an operation in a mausoleum, and behind them, an old man in a robe sitting on the floor, exhausted, who has been holding the line by himself, with nothing but stubbornness and prayer. Mr. Fuji. He came up here alone. An elderly man from the small house at the bottom of the hill, who takes in orphaned Pokémon and raises them, who has no gym and no badge and no title, walked into a building full of possessed mediums and criminals, and did not come out, because somebody had to try. When you find him, he is not victorious. He is just still there. And when it is over, he takes you back to his house and gives you a gift. And the gift is a flute. The Poké Flute. An instrument that wakes what will not wake. A small carved thing that produces a sound capable of pulling a Snorlax out of a sleep so deep that the road under it has been closed for years. Consider where that object came from. Consider who kept it. The man who lives beside the graveyard, who spends his days with the bereaved and the abandoned, is the custodian of the one instrument in Kanto that can call something back from a sleep that looks like death. He does not use it on the tower. He gives it to a child, so the child can clear a road. But he has it. He has always had it, sitting in that little house at the bottom of the hill, in a town whose name means, I will not forget you. There is a theory about Mr. Fuji, and it is one of the oldest and best of all the Lavender Town theories, and we are going to take it apart properly tonight, because it connects this quiet town to the single greatest act of scientific violence in the history of the Pokémon world. It concerns a burned mansion on a volcanic island, a laboratory diary, a creature engineered out of a jungle fossil, and a scientist with the same name who lost a daughter and tried to bring her back. Whether they are the same man is one of the darkest unanswered questions in Kanto, and the answer changes what the volunteer Pokémon house actually is. That story waits for us in the next chapter, where we follow the name Fuji from a small purple town to the ashes of Cinnabar Island, and find out why a man who could not save one life spent the rest of his own tending the graves of others. But before we leave the tower, stay a moment longer on the 6th floor, in the dark, where the Marowak stood. Because she raises a question that the game asks and never answers, and it is the question that turns Lavender Town from a sad place into an unsolved one. If the Marowak was there, in the tower, as a ghost, standing on the 6th floor, blocking the stairs, then where is her body? She was not killed in the tower. The story the town tells, and the story the boy in the house near the tower tells, is that she was killed elsewhere, killed defending her child from men in black uniforms who wanted something from her, and that her spirit came here afterward. Which means the Pokémon Tower is not simply a cemetery where things happen to be restless. It is a destination. Something in that building draws spirits to it from outside, across roads and distance, the way a light draws moths across a field at night. The Marowak did not die there. She arrived there, and if she could arrive, then everything else in that tower could have arrived too. The white hands the townspeople talk about, the unnamed presences the channelers describe, the voices. None of it necessarily belongs to the small stones on the 2nd floor. The graves may be nothing more than the reason the tower exists, the flame that got lit, and everything that has gathered around that flame since may have come from somewhere else entirely, drawn up out of Kanto toward the only building in the region that keeps a light on for the dead. Which brings us to her child, because there was a child. That is the whole reason she was on those stairs, and in the aftermath of everything that happened in that tower, in the quiet afterward, when the rockets are gone, and Mr. Fuji is home, and the channelers have gone back to their standing and their listening, that child is still out there somewhere, and the Pokédex has been telling us what happens to it since the very first day this world existed. Cubone, the lonely Pokémon. Type ground, small, pale, and it wears a skull. The entries are not subtle, and they never have been. They say, in language that has barely changed across 9 generations of games, that Cubone wears the skull of its dead mother, that it pines for the mother it will never see again, that it cries out in the night, and that the crying is amplified by the bone helmet it wears, so that the sound of a grieving child echoes across the fields at night in a voice made louder by the remains of the thing it is grieving for. They say that if you look at the inside of the skull, you can see the stains of tears. They say that the Cubone's own face has never been seen by anyone, because it will not take the skull off. We have all read those entries so many times that they have gone soft in our minds, the way a familiar word goes strange if you look at it long enough. So let's look at it long enough. In the official encyclopedia of the Pokémon world, compiled by researchers, distributed to children, there is a species whose defining behavior is the wearing of its dead parent's skull, and whose defining sound is the amplified echo of its own mourning, and nobody in that world has ever suggested that this is a crisis. It is listed as habit, like a ratata gnawing or a Pidgey kicking up sand, and the mysteries stack up fast when you start pulling on it, and they have never been resolved. Where do the skulls come from, in general? Not this Marowak, not the one in the tower, but all of them. Every Cubone in the world, in every region, is wearing a skull, which means every Cubone in the world has lost its mother. Not some, all of them. There is no Cubone anywhere, in any game, in any generation, that appears without the helmet. The species does not exist in an unbereaved state. Whatever a Cubone is before it puts the skull on, no trainer, no researcher, no professor has ever documented it. And the skull does not fit a Marowak. Look at them side by side. Look at a Marowak's head, and then look at the helmet on a Cubone, and notice that the shape is wrong, that the proportions do not line up the way a mother's skull and a child's helmet should. There are those who have spent years arguing about this, measuring sprites, comparing art, and the disagreement has never been settled. Some insist it is stylization and nothing more. Others insist the skull belongs to something else entirely, something that is not a Marowak at all, and once that idea gets into your head, it is very difficult to remove, because it means the encyclopedia is either wrong or being kind. And then there is the oldest theory in the entire franchise, the one that comes out of the first generation, out of Kanto itself, and refuses to die no matter how many times it is dismissed. The theory that Cubone is a Kangaskhan's child. That the small creature carried in the pouch, the one nobody has ever seen properly, the one that is only ever a shape peeking out over the lip of its mother's belly, becomes a Cubone when its mother dies, and that the skull it puts on is hers. That, in Kanto, where poachers were operating openly enough to seize a tower, there might be a reason so many orphans were wandering the eastern routes at once. We will follow all of it. The skulls, the tears, the sound in the night, the theory about the pouch, the strange thing that happens to Marowak in the islands far to the south where they dance with fire and change their type entirely and stop being a grieving species at all and become something colder. There is an answer buried in that transformation, and we will dig for it. For now, let the town settle. The light is almost gone over Lavender. The tower stands with its 7 floors of small stones and its handful of white-robed listeners, and the sea moves against the pilings down on Route 12, and somewhere out past the edge of town, in the tall grass where nobody is walking at this hour, something small is crying inside a helmet of bone, and the sound is carrying further than it should. There is a name in Kanto that appears twice, in 2 places that should have nothing to do with one another, and the coincidence has never been explained. The first place is the little building at the bottom of the hill in Lavender Town, with its hand-painted sign and its small rooms full of Pokémon that nobody came back for. Inside, an old man in a plain robe pours water for creatures that were left behind, and when you ask the people of the town who he is, they tell you he is a kind man who has lived here a long time and that he knows more about spirits than anyone alive. His name is Fuji. The second place is 400 kilometers to the southwest, across open water, on an island built on the shoulder of an active volcano, in the burned-out shell of a mansion that nobody has repaired. Cinnabar Island is the strangest settlement in Kanto, and I want you to picture it properly, because the games give you a beach and a gym and a lab, and let you move on. It is a small island of black sand and hot stone. The air smells of sulfur. The sea around it is warm, in places where it should not be warm. There is a laboratory on the eastern side where researchers revive fossils, which is to say there is a building on this island where the dead are routinely brought back, cell by cell, from stone. And on the western side, set back from the shore, there is a mansion with its roof partly gone and its windows blown out, and the floors inside are still black in places, from a fire that happened long enough ago that nobody in town wants to talk about the year. You go inside because you need a key. That is the reason the story gives you. The Cinnabar gym is locked, and the key is somewhere in the mansion, and so a child walks alone into a burned building on a volcanic island and starts opening doors. And what is in there, scattered on desks and left in drawers and lying on the floor where somebody dropped it while running, is a set of research diaries. They are short. There are only a handful of them, and each one is a few lines long, and they are the most consequential documents in the entire first generation of these games. They are dated. They read like the log of a project that went well until it went catastrophically. The first entry says that a new Pokémon was discovered deep in the jungle of Guyana, South America. That is the line. That is how it starts. Not a legend, not a prophecy, not a temple. An expedition into a rainforest and a discovery in the field, written in the flat voice of a scientist who has not yet realized what he is holding. They named it Mew. Mew, the creature that carries the genetic blueprint of every Pokémon that has ever existed, the pink wisp that phases through stone and laughs, the ancestor. Somebody found it in a jungle and wrote a memo about it. The second entry says, Mew gave birth. Just that. We know almost nothing about the circumstances, about the conditions, about whether it was willing, and the entry does not ask. It records an event. The third entry names the child. They called the newborn Mewtwo. And the fourth entry, dated a few days later, is the one that empties the room out around you when you read it. Mewtwo is far too powerful. We have failed to curb its violent tendencies. That is where the diaries stop. There is no fifth entry. There is a burned mansion, a gym key on the floor, a basement full of switches, and an absence where the rest of the record should be. And the absence tells you exactly what happened. The lab did not close down. The lab was destroyed from the inside by the thing it made, and the reason there is no final diary entry is that the person writing it did not get the chance to write one. So who was writing them? The games do not say. The mansion does not put a name on the desk. But the wider world of Pokémon does, in the first of the films, and the name it gives is Dr. Fuji. In that telling, the man who led the Mewtwo project was a scientist of enormous ability and one specific, private wound. He had a daughter. Her name, in the English version, is Amber, and in the original Japanese, she is Ai, which is simply the word for love. She died. And Fuji, who had spent his career learning to copy living things, could not accept it, and so he did the thing that every story about grief and science has warned us about since the first of them was ever told. He tried to bring her back. The film shows you the attempt. It shows you cloning tanks in a facility under the earth, and it shows you what the process produced, which was not a daughter, but a partial, flickering consciousness that could speak and think and know it was dying and could not be given a stable body. And it shows you the other thing in the tanks alongside her, the other experiment running in the same room, sharing the same amniotic dark, listening, Mewtwo, two children being grown in adjacent tanks in the same laboratory, one of them a copy of a dead girl. One of them the most powerful engineered creature in the world. And the reason Mewtwo's first memory in that film is a memory of loneliness, of a voice in the dark that was there and then was not, is that the girl faded and Mewtwo did not, and Mewtwo was awake for it. Now come back to Lavender Town. Come back up the hill, to the small house at the bottom of the slope, and look at the man inside it again, with all of that behind you. An old man who lives beside the largest graveyard in Kanto, who takes in Pokémon that have lost the people they belong to, and raises them, and asks nothing. Who is the only human being in the region willing to walk unarmed into the Pokémon Tower, and stand in front of criminals to protect the graves of animals? Who knows, better than any professor, what happens when a spirit will not leave? Who keeps in his house the one instrument in the world capable of waking something out of a sleep that cannot be broken by any other means? And whose name is Fuji? Nobody in the games will confirm it. That is the mystery, and it is a real one, not a manufactured one. The connection has never been officially stated inside the main series, and the film exists in a slightly different current of the same river, and so the question sits there permanently, unresolved, load-bearing. Is the kind old man in the purple town the same man who made Mewtwo? If he is, then everything about Lavender Town changes shape. It means the volunteer Pokémon house is not a charity. It is a penance. It means the man feeding orphaned Pokémon in a small room by the graveyard is a man who once tried to defeat death in a laboratory and succeeded just enough to understand exactly what he had done. It means he came here on purpose. Out of every place in Kanto he could have disappeared to after the mansion burned, he chose the town whose name means remembrance, and he built his life at the foot of a tower full of the dead, and he spent his remaining years doing the smallest and most humble version of the thing he had once attempted at the largest and most arrogant scale. He could not save one life with all the money and equipment and genius in Kanto, so he spent the rest of his time keeping the water bowls full for animals nobody wanted. It also means something colder, and this is the part that people tend to skip past. It means the Poké Flute is not a folk instrument. Think about who would own an object like that. An item that produces a sound which forcibly wakes a sleeping thing, which drags consciousness back into a body that has decided to stop responding. In the hands of a village elder, that is a charming piece of local craft. In the hands of the man who built cloning tanks under a volcano, it is a prototype. It is the survivor of a research program. It is the last working piece of a man's attempt to call something back, and he keeps it in a house beside a graveyard, and he does not use it. And when a child walks in from the tower, he hands it over to solve a traffic problem on Route 12. Whether that is true is not knowable from inside the games. What is knowable is that it fits too well to be comfortable, and that in a franchise which is normally careful to explain itself, the silence around Mr. Fuji is unusually complete. Nobody in Lavender Town asks him where he came from. Nobody in Cinnabar mentions where the doctor went. The two ends of the thread are lying in the same room, and no character in Kanto has ever picked them both up at once. There is one more thing about that mansion, and then we will leave the island and go back to the tower, because there is a small child waiting for us out in the grass, and we have not finished with it. The Pokémon mansion is haunted by absence, in a way the tower is not. The tower has ghosts. The mansion has nothing at all, and it is worse. When you walk those corridors, you meet Magmar in the ruined rooms, and Grimer in the flooded parts, and Wheezing in the stairwells, which is to say the building has been colonized by fire and poison and industrial waste, the three things that grow where humans have failed. The mansion is not remembered. It is not tended, there is no volunteer house on Cinnabar, no white-robed medium standing among the ash, no sign at the edge of town admitting what happened here. The island has simply built its gym a short walk from the site of the worst scientific catastrophe in Kanto's history, and gone on selling ice cream on the beach. That contrast is the whole reason Lavender Town frightens people the way it does. Cinnabar forgot on purpose. Lavender refused to. And of the two towns, the one that keeps its promise is the one where the dead will not stay put, which raises a question that folklore has been asking for thousands of years without ever settling it. Do the dead linger because we remember them? Does the tower create its own ghosts simply by being a building where mourning is allowed to accumulate for generations, floor upon floor, promise upon promise, until the weight of all that remembrance becomes something with a shape and a temperature and the power to put its hand on a shoulder? Nobody in Kanto has answered that either, but the volunteers keep climbing the stairs, and the mediums keep standing in the dark, and the tower keeps filling up. Now, out to the grass, because we left something crying. Route 8 and the fields around the tunnel mouth, in the late hours, are where the Cubone are. And now that we have followed the tower's story to its end, we can go back to the beginning of the tower's story, which is not the tower at all. It is a family. The Pokédex has been telling us about that family since the very first cartridge, and it has never once softened the description. Cubone wears the skull of its dead mother. It has never been seen without it. Its cries echo inside the empty bone and come out amplified, so that a small animal's grief carries across an entire valley. On the inside of the skull, where the child's face is pressed against it, there are stains that the entries describe as tear marks. We read that as children. Most of us read it before we were old enough to understand what a mother's skull is. And the entries kept coming, generation after generation, and they kept saying the same thing in slightly different words, and the newer ones added details that made the older ones worse. That the Cubone thinks of its mother when it looks at the moon and cries, and that the crying makes the skull rattle, a hollow sound like knocking. That it never removes the helmet, so nobody knows what its face looks like. That it is stronger than it appears, because sorrow has made it strong. There is a species in this world whose evolutionary strategy is bereavement. And here is the first unsolved piece, and it is the one that has generated more argument than almost any other question in the franchise. Every Cubone has a skull. Not most, every single one. In every region where they appear, in every generation, in every game, the Cubone you encounter in the wild is already wearing the helmet. There is no unhelmeted stage. There is no baby Cubone with its face uncovered, playing in the grass beside a living parent. The species does not exist in the wild, in an intact family. Which means one of two things, and both of them are terrible. Either every Cubone in existence has lost its mother, in which case something is happening to that species at a rate that should have triggered an emergency response from every research institution in the world, and instead triggered a paragraph in an encyclopedia. Or, the skull is not what the entries say it is, and the encyclopedia is either mistaken or telling a comfortable story about something less comfortable. Look at the skull. Really look at it. Hold the image of a Cubone's helmet in your mind, and then hold the image of a Marowak's head beside it, and notice the ways they refuse to line up. The horns are wrong, the jaw is wrong, the proportion of the eye sockets to the crown does not match. A Marowak's skull, if you rendered it honestly, would not sit on a Cubone's head like that. People have argued about this for the better part of 30 years, with sprite comparisons and official artwork and museum-grade patience, and no consensus has ever formed. One camp says stylization. The designs are stylized creatures, and the skull is a symbol, not an anatomical claim. The other camp says the mismatch is the clue, and that the reason the skull does not fit a Marowak is that it was never a Marowak skull at all. Which brings us to the oldest theory in Kanto. Kangaskhan, the parent Pokémon, a large, powerful, ground-dwelling creature with a pouch on its belly, and in that pouch a child. And here is the detail that has been quietly sitting in plain sight since 1996. Nobody has ever seen that child properly. It is a shape. In the artwork, it is a small head peeking over the lip of the pouch, and the Pokédex tells you the parent will fight savagely if the young one is threatened, and it tells you that the baby does not leave the pouch for the first 3 years of its life, and then it tells you nothing else. There is no separate entry for it. It is not a species. It has no name. It is listed as part of its mother. So the theory goes like this. The thing in the pouch is a Cubone, or rather, the thing in the pouch is what a Cubone is before the event that makes it a Cubone. A Kangaskhan's child, safe in the belly of the strongest ground type on the eastern routes, protected so completely that it will not walk on its own feet for 3 years. And when the mother dies, that child is not protected any longer. It climbs out. And it takes the only piece of her it can carry, and it puts it on, And from that moment it has a name, and a Pokédex number, and a species, and an entry that says, it is lonely. The evidence for it is circumstantial and strange, and has never quite gone away. There is the fact that the two share the ground type. There is the fact that a Cubone's bone club has to come from somewhere, and no entry has ever explained where the first bone comes from. There is the way both species were placed in the same Kanto roots and caves. There is the fact that in the original games, the Kangaskhan and the Cubone are threaded together in the code itself, in ways that produced some of the most famous glitches in the history of the medium, which we will come to later tonight when we go down into the machinery underneath Kanto and look at what is actually written there. And there is the timing, because Kanto in the era of the first games had a poaching problem, not a rumor of one, a documented, organized, industrial one. Team Rocket was excavating Mount Moon for moonstones. It was in the Safari Zone. It was operating out of the basement of a casino in Celadon and the top floors of the Sylph building in Saffron. Its business model was the extraction of value from living creatures, and the most valuable thing about a Kangaskhan, to a syndicate that thinks in inventory, is that it is large and rare, and comes with a second one attached. If the theory is true, then the eastern roots of Kanto were full of orphans at exactly the moment that a criminal organization was harvesting the region, and the Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town was where the ones that did not survive their orphanhood ended up, and the small stones on the second floor, with the small names on them, are the visible edge of something much larger. And if the theory is true, then the Marowak on the 6th floor was not the first mother Team Rocket killed in that part of Kanto. She was just the one who came back. Because that is what happened to her, and the game is unusually explicit about it for a story aimed at children. In the house near the tower, a boy tells you the story. The Rockets wanted something. She would not let them take her child. They killed her for it. And her child, the one she died protecting, put on her skull and walked out into the grass. And she followed the pull of the tower on the hill and stationed herself on the 6th floor. And she stayed there, screaming, unmeasurable, unnameable, for as long as it took, for a child with a corporate lens to come up the stairs and let her go. Put those two facts next to each other and hold them there for a moment. Somewhere in Kanto, at the same time, there is a Marowak spirit on the 6th floor of a tower and a Cubone in a field wearing her skull. The mother is in the building. The mother's bones are on the child's head. She is in two places at once, and the child does not know that one of those places exists and cannot be told. That is the darkest single fact in the whole of the first generation, and it is delivered in about 4 lines of dialogue in a house nobody has to enter. Now, there is one more chapter to the Marowak story, and it happens a very long way from Lavender Town, in a chain of tropical islands to the far south, and it is the closest thing to an answer that the franchise has ever offered about what grief does to a species over time. In Alola, Marowak is different, not slightly, fundamentally. The bone it carries is on fire. Its type has changed entirely, from ground to fire and ghost, and that pairing is not decoration. A Marowak in those islands is, officially, partly a ghost while it is still alive. Its bones are its own, and its flames are green and cold-looking, and it swings the burning club in wide arcs, and the local explanation for why it developed this way is a story about competition and predators and the scarcity of the islands, which is the kind of explanation researchers give when they are describing the mechanism and not the meaning. But the culture around it tells you the meaning. In those islands, the Alolan Marowak is not treated as an animal that adapted. It is treated as a dancer. The entries describe it whirling the flaming bone in ritual movements, and the local people describe the dance as a mourning ritual, a way of grieving for the dead, and the Marowak performing it are said to be dancing for their fallen comrades. A species defined by the wearing of a dead parent's skull, relocated across an ocean, developed into a creature whose defining behavior is a funeral dance performed with fire, and which is half ghost while its heart is still beating. That is what the answer looks like, if there is one. Not that the grief heals, that it becomes a practice. That somewhere in the world there is a population of this species that stopped standing in the dark, crying into a bone helmet, and started dancing with it instead, and that the price of learning to do that was becoming partly dead themselves. The Cubone in the fields outside Lavender Town has not learned that yet. It is standing in the tall grass with the moon coming up over Route 8, knocking its helmet gently against the ground the way the entries describe, and the sound is going out across the fields and up the hill, and past the sign that says Noble Purple Town, and into the tower, where the mediums are standing in the dark with their eyes half closed, listening to everything. And the mediums are the next thread, because we have not properly looked at what is inside that tower besides the graves. We have talked about the Marowak, who had a reason to be there. We have not talked about the others, the white hands on shoulders. The nameless presences the townspeople describe, the three species that make Kanto's ghost line, whose Pokédex entries are, without any competition at all, the most disturbing text ever printed in an official Pokémon product. Ghastly. First, a cloud. That is the honest description of it. A sphere of purple gas with a face in it, and the entries tell you that its body is made of gas so thin that it can be dispersed by a gust of wind, which sounds almost sweet until you read the rest of the sentence, which is that this gas can envelop a target of any size and cause suffocation. A creature that a breeze can blow apart, which kills by covering your face. And there is the entry that tells you Ghastly can slip through any obstacle, that walls mean nothing to it, and the one that says it lurks in old buildings, and the one that mentions a Ghastly killing an Indian elephant in 2 seconds. That is in the encyclopedia. It has been in there, in one wording or another, for decades. Haunter, second, and this is the one that stops people cold when they read it as adults. Haunter's tongue is made of gas. If it licks you, the entries say, your soul is taken. Some versions say that a lick from a haunter causes you to shake uncontrollably until you die. Some say the victim's life force is drained away slowly, and the reason it wants to lick you, according to the entries, is loneliness. It hides in the dark and reaches for warmth, and the reaching is fatal. There is an entry that describes it lurking in the dark and using its gas hands to grab you from behind. And then Gengar, the one on every shirt and every keychain, with the grin. Read its entries in order sometime, if you want to lose an hour. It is said to emerge from darkness to steal the life of anyone lost in the mountains. On the night of a full moon, if shadows move on their own and laugh, it is Gengar's doing. It hides in shadows, and it is said that if it is chilling you from behind, you will feel a sudden cold. It steals the heat from a room, so that if you shiver in a warm place, a Gengar is there. It pretends to be your shadow. It mimics your movements so exactly that you do not notice the difference, and it waits. That is the third stage evolution of a starter-adjacent, mass-market, plush toy species, and its official biological description is that it impersonates your shadow while planning to take your life. And here is where it loops back to Lavender Town, because those three are the ones you meet in the Pokémon Tower. Ghastly and Haunter, drifting between the headstones, in the same rooms as the channelers. The tower is their habitat, which means the building is doing two things at once. It is holding the graves of the ordinary dead, the Rattata and the Pidgey and the Nidoran, with their small stones and their tidy inscriptions. And it is home to a population of creatures whose documented behavior includes suffocating things, draining life, stealing heat, and wearing the shape of a living person. And the game never distinguishes between them, not once. When the townspeople talk about the ghosts in the tower, they do not say which kind. When a channeler is possessed and her eyes go glassy, nothing tells you whether the thing wearing her is the spirit of somebody's Pidgey or a haunter that found a door. That is the mystery at the center of the Pokémon Tower, and it is the reason the Silphscope had to be invented at all. In Kanto, there are ghosts that are Pokémon, and there are ghosts that are the dead, and the tower is the one place where both are present in the same room, and no instrument on Earth can reliably tell you which one just touched your shoulder. So let us stay with them a while, the ghosts that are alive, because there is a theory about Gengar that has quietly become one of the most beloved pieces of fan scholarship in the entire franchise. And it starts with something you can see for yourself in about 10 seconds if you put two sprites side by side. Look at Clefable. Then look at Gengar. The silhouettes are the same. Not similar, the same. The rounded body, the tapering limbs, the pointed ears set at the same angle on the head, the little curled tail, the height, the stance. Turn Clefable black and you have a Gengar. Turn Gengar pink and give it a spiral on the ear and you have a Clefable. And once you have seen it, you cannot stop seeing it, because these two species sit at opposite ends of everything. Clefable is the fairy of the moonlit hills, shy, rarely seen, said to come down from Mount Moon on quiet nights, associated with wishes and with something that fell out of the sky. Gengar hides in shadows and steals the heat from rooms. The theory says Gengar is Clefable's shadow. that somewhere in the deep past a Clefable's shadow separated from it, the way a thing can separate when there is too much moonlight and too much strangeness in the same place, and that the shadow kept walking. That would explain the shape. It would explain why Gengar's documented obsession is impersonation, why the entries say it pretends to be your shadow and mimics your movements, why the thing it seems to want more than anything is to be attached to a living body again. A shadow that lost its owner and has been trying to attach itself to somebody else's feet ever since, and cannot, because the only thing it knows how to do with warmth is take it. Nobody has confirmed it. Nobody has denied it either, which in this franchise usually means the door is being deliberately left open. There is a darker version of the same idea, and it is older than most people realize, and it grows directly out of the Pokémon Tower. It goes like this. Ghastly, Haunter and Gengar are not a normal evolutionary line at all. They are stages of something else. A Ghastly is a spirit that has just arrived, formless, barely coherent, gas and a face. A Haunter is a spirit that has begun to remember what it was, that has grown hands and a tongue, and started reaching for the living, clumsily, hungrily, out of loneliness. And a Gengar is a spirit that has finished the process. It has legs, it has a solid body, it grins. And in the theory's most unsettling reading, what a Gengar has finished becoming is not a Pokémon at all. Because Gengar is the only member of that line that walks. Ghastly floats, Haunter floats. Gengar has feet and stands on them, and its silhouette is bipedal and upright, and shaped the way a small person is shaped, and the way it behaves is the way a person behaves. It plays tricks, it laughs at the results, it hides in the corner of a room where a group of people are gathered, because it wants to be near the gathering. It follows a specific individual and copies their walk. It leads travelers off mountain paths, which is not a hunting behavior. That is a folklore behavior. That is the oldest thing every culture on Earth says about the malicious dead. Whether or not there was ever a person at the beginning of that line, the fact remains that Kanto's ghost trio is arranged in a sequence that runs from formless to human-shaped, and that the sequence completes itself inside the graveyard tower in Lavender Town, and that the finished product is the one that impersonates the living. There is a piece of official text that I think about more than is reasonable, and it is not from Kanto at all. It is from a species discovered generations later, in Unova, and it exists because somebody at some point decided to answer the question the Kanto ghosts had left hanging. Yamask. A small floating creature that carries a mask, and the mask is a face, and the entry says, the mask is the face it wore when it was human, that each of these Pokémon was once a person, and that the mask is a death mask of its own former features, and that sometimes it looks at the mask and cries, because it remembers being alive. Once that entry existed, everything in the Pokémon Tower changed retroactively. It is now canon, printed and distributed, and never withdrawn, that at least one species in this world is made of dead human beings who kept a souvenir of their own faces. So when the residents of Lavender Town say they have seen white hands resting on people's shoulders in that tower, and when a channeler comes out of a trance and says the spirit has gone, there is no longer any comfortable reading available, where all of this is only about Pidgey. Somebody's grandmother could be in that tower. Nothing in the lore prevents it. Nothing in the lore has ever prevented it. Kanto simply chose not to mention it, and built a building with 7 floors of small graves, and hired volunteers for the first floor, and let mediums stand in the dark on the 3rd, and left the 6th floor to whatever was strong enough to hold it. And now the town is quiet again, and the light has gone completely, and we have arrived at the thing you have been waiting for since the beginning of this video, because you cannot talk about Lavender Town for very long before someone brings up the music. The Lavender Town theme is 30-odd seconds long. It loops. It was written for a hardware sound chip with 4 channels, one of which is noise, by a composer named Junichi Masuda, who was writing the entire soundtrack for the first Pokémon games, under conditions that were, by any modern standard, absurdly constrained. He had almost no memory to work with. He had a handful of waveforms. And for the town built around a graveyard, he wrote something that does not behave like any other track in the game. Here is what it actually does, technically, because the technical explanation is more interesting than the myth, and almost nobody bothers with it. Every other town theme in Kanto is built on stable harmony. Pallet Town is warm and resolved. Viridian is bright. Cerulean is gentle and forward-moving. Celadon is bustling and major key and slightly showy. They all give your ear a home note and keep returning to it, which is what makes them comforting, and it is why people can hum them 30 years later. Lavender Town refuses to give you a home note. The melody wanders in intervals that never settle, with dissonant pairs held against each other, so that your ear keeps waiting for a resolution that the loop never provides. It uses high, thin tones in the upper register, the kind that sit uncomfortably close to the frequencies that make people wince, and it places them against a low pulse that does not move. And critically, it does not build and release like a normal piece of game music. It cycles. It comes back to the same unresolved place every 30 seconds forever, and the effect on a listener is a low-grade, accumulating unease that gets worse the longer you stand still in that town. That is not an accident, and it is not a curse. That is craft. It is a composer with 4 channels and no room describing a graveyard, and doing it so effectively that the piece became the single most notorious track in the history of video game music. And then, about 14 years later, the internet invented a story about it. Lavender Town Syndrome. If you have spent any time at all in the dark corners of the web, you know the shape of it. And if you have not, it goes like this. When the original games launched in Japan in early 1996, the story claims, children who reached Lavender Town began to fall ill. Headaches, nosebleeds, irritability, sleeplessness, and then, according to the story, worse. Hundreds of children, always between the ages of 7 and 12, always in the weeks following release, are said to have taken their own lives. The story claims that the cause was the town's music, which supposedly contained high-frequency tones that adult ears could not detect, but which affected children's developing brains. It claims that the track was quietly altered for the international release, the harmful frequencies removed, and that the incident was buried so completely that no record of it survives. Some versions add that if you run the original audio through a spectrogram, you can see images hidden in it. Some versions add a hidden message. Some versions add the composer's own confession. None of it happened. I want to be very direct about that, because this is a story that has been circulating for well over a decade, and it is worth being precise about what it is. There is no record of a spike in child deaths in Japan in 1996 tied to a video game. There are no contemporary news reports, no coroner's records, no parliamentary questions, no lawsuits, nothing in the Japanese press of the period. No mention in the enormous volume of Japanese-language writing about the launch of a franchise that became the biggest media property on Earth. And that absence is not evidence of a cover-up. It is evidence that there was nothing to cover up. Because 1996 was not a year in which several hundred children could die in the same country from the same cause and leave no trace in any archive. The story itself has a traceable origin, and it is not 1996. It first appeared in English on the internet around 2010 as a written creepypasta in the same wave of anonymous horror fiction that produced most of the other legends people now half believe. It was posted, it was copied, it was reposted, it grew details with each retelling in exactly the way folklore has always grown details, and within a few years it had detached from its author and become something people described as a rumor rather than a story, which is the moment any piece of fiction becomes dangerous. The spectrogram claim is the easiest part to dismantle, and it is a good demonstration of how these things work. The Game Boy's audio hardware physically cannot encode an image in a spectrogram. To hide a picture in a spectrogram, you need to control a broad, dense band of frequencies simultaneously and shape them precisely across time, which requires either a sampled audio file or a synthesizer with far more capability than 4 channels of square waves and noise. The Game Boy sound chip produces a handful of simple tones. Run the real Lavender Town theme through analysis software, and you see exactly what you would expect to see, which is a handful of simple tones. The images people have circulated were made afterward, by people, on purpose, and attached to the story to give it teeth. The binaural claim falls apart on the same kind of inspection. Binaural effects require 2 ears receiving 2 different signals. The original Game Boy had 1 speaker. The vast majority of children playing that game in 1996 were listening through a single small mono speaker on a handheld device in a room with other sounds in it. And the claim that the music was changed for the international release is the most interesting one because it is the only part of the story with a grain of something real inside it, which is precisely why the story has survived so long. Here is the grain. The original Japanese red and green did sound different from the later international releases, and so did yellow, and the differences were not confined to Lavender Town. The Game Boy's sound hardware was revised over the life of the platform, and the games themselves were revised, rebalanced, and rewritten between versions, and audio in particular was touched. The Lavender Town track in the earliest Japanese release uses a harsher, higher, more piercing arrangement in its upper voice than the version most Western players grew up with. Play them back to back and you can hear it. The early one is thinner and more abrasive. The later one is rounder. So a real, verifiable, minor technical difference in an audio arrangement sat in the historical record, waiting. And a decade and a half later, somebody built a mass casualty event on top of it. And because the small factual detail at the bottom of the pile was checkable, the enormous invented thing on top of it acquired a credibility it never earned. That is how the best folklore is always constructed. You do not lie about everything. You lie about one thing, and you tell the truth about the rest, and the truth carries the lie. And there is one more reason this particular story took root so easily, and it is the part most retellings leave out. Because it involves something that genuinely happened, and that genuinely hurt children, and it happened close enough to the same period to be confused with it. In December 1997, the Pokémon anime aired an episode in Japan involving a virtual world and a digital creature. Late in that episode, there is a sequence of rapidly alternating red and blue flashes, filling the entire screen, repeating at a rate of several cycles per second, held for several seconds. It was a stylistic choice, an explosion rendered with a technique that had been used before in Japanese animation, but never at that intensity, that fullness of frame, or that duration, on a program watched by millions of children sitting close to bright television sets in dark rooms. Hundreds of children were taken to hospital that night. The commonly cited figure is around 685, with a smaller number requiring admission and observation. Most had photosensitive seizures. Many had never had a seizure before in their lives, and never had another one afterward. Some were affected not by the broadcast itself, but by watching the sequence replayed on news programs later that evening, which is one of the strangest and saddest footnotes in the history of television. The consequences were immediate and enormous. The series was pulled from the air for 4 months. The episode has never been rebroadcast anywhere, in any country, in any language, and it never will be. The Japanese broadcasting industry adopted new guidelines on flashing imagery. Britain and other countries followed with their own standards. And the reason you now see a warning at the start of so many programs advising viewers that the content contains flashing lights is, in a direct and traceable line, that night in December 1997. So there was a real incident. It involved real children, real hospitals, real regulatory change, and a real Pokémon product. It is documented to the point of tedium, with medical papers and government reports, and a permanently withheld episode. And the fictional story about Lavender Town borrowed all of that weight. The mechanism is the same in both stories, which is a piece of children's media reaching through a screen and doing physical harm to a child's nervous system. Once you know that this can happen, because it demonstrably did, the invented version stops sounding impossible. It sounds like the other one, and that is why Lavender Town Syndrome, which is fiction, has outlived and outgrown the actual event, which is history. There is something almost poetic about it, in a way I find hard to shake. Of all the towns in Kanto for the internet to build a mass death legend around, it chose the one whose entire purpose is remembrance. A town built to keep the dead from being forgotten became the setting for a story about hundreds of forgotten dead children whose records were erased. The town's own function was turned inside out and used as the engine of its haunting. And the town seems to invite that. Because Lavender Town Syndrome is not the only thing the world invented about this place. It is not even the strangest. There are 2 other stories that grew out of that tower, and both of them are older in spirit than the syndrome, and both of them attach themselves to real, verifiable, genuinely inexplicable things that happen inside the actual game. Which is where we go next, down into the machinery, into the parts of Kanto that were never meant to be seen. The white hands, the buried alive, and the glitches, the real ones, the ones you can still reproduce today on original hardware, where the 6th floor of the Pokémon Tower reaches into the guts of the cartridge and pulls out things that should not have names. Start with the hands, because the hands are in the script. Walk through Lavender Town and talk to the residents, and one of them will tell you, in the plain text of the original English localization, that white hands have been seen in the tower, reaching, resting on shoulders, In some versions of the dialogue, it is a woman who says she saw one on her shoulder and turned around and there was nobody behind her. That is not a rumor about the game. That is the game. It shipped with that line in it. And it is remarkable how little is done with it. The Marowak gets a scene. The channelers get an encounter. The White Hands get one sentence from a person standing in a room, and then nothing. No quest, no investigation, no item that reveals them. No enemy that turns out to be responsible. The single most viscerally frightening image in the entire first generation, a disembodied white hand resting on the shoulder of a living person in a dark building full of graves, is delivered as small talk by a background character and never mentioned again. That gap is exactly the kind of gap folklore rushes into. And it did. The story that grew there is called White Hand, and it is one of the most widely circulated Pokémon horror stories ever written. In it, the hands are not atmosphere, they are a mechanic. Enter the tower, walk in a certain pattern, or in some tellings simply stand still long enough on a particular floor, and the screen changes. A white hand appears on the sprite's shoulder, and then the story diverges into a dozen endings, depending on who is telling it. In some, the game freezes permanently and the cartridge is dead. In some, the player character is dragged down through the floor. In some, the screen goes black and the player wakes up in the game as one of the channelers, standing among the graves with unfocused eyes. None of that is in any cartridge. But notice what the story is actually doing. It is finishing something the game left unfinished. Somebody read that one line of dialogue as a child, felt the enormous unclosed loop of it, and closed it. That is the same instinct that produced ghost stories in every village on Earth, and it fired inside a Game Boy. The second story is older and stranger and much sadder, and its name is Buried Alive. It is set in Pokémon Yellow, or in a bootleg cartridge of it, depending on the telling, and the version most people know is written in the first person by someone who claims to have found a copy secondhand. The story describes a game that behaves almost normally, except that when the player character walks toward Lavender Town, something begins to follow him. In the most well-known version, the sprite that follows is a boy in white, dirtied, wrong, and the further the story goes, the more the game stops being a game. Music slows down, sprites are replaced, the world empties out, and the reveal at the end of it, which I will not spoil in full because it is genuinely well constructed as a piece of writing, involves the identity of the thing following the player and the reason it cannot stop. What matters about Buried Alive is not the plot, it is where it chose to happen. Both of the great Lavender Town horror stories, and The Syndrome, and dozens of smaller ones, all cluster in the same square kilometer of a fictional map. Nobody writes creepypasta about Vermilion City. There are no legends about Fuchsia. The internet spent 20 years building an entire mythology on a location that consists of 6 buildings and a tower, because that location was already doing 90% of the work. And now the real part. The part that is not folklore, that requires no belief, that you can reproduce yourself tonight on an original cartridge if you have one, and that is genuinely, provably strange. The 6th floor of the Pokémon Tower is a hole in the fabric of the first generation of Pokémon. Here is what is actually happening in the code. When you encounter the unidentified ghost, the game does something unusual. It has to display a battle against a creature that has no species, and the way the original games handle that is by swapping in a special sprite and suppressing the name and level, while the underlying data still points at a Marowak. That works fine, but the routine that does it leaves a residue, and the way the original games manage battle data means that residue can be carried out of the tower and into other things. Combine that with a second quirk. In the first generation, when you fly to a location or move between certain map segments, the game keeps a small amount of information about the last wild encounter it was preparing. Under specific conditions, that leftover data determines what you meet next. And combine both of those with the third and most famous quirk in the entire history of the medium. On the coastline near Cinnabar Island, along the eastern edge of the island, there are tiles that the game treats as water for the purpose of encounters, but which have no encounter table of their own. The game looks up the list of Pokémon that live there, finds nothing, and rather than refusing, uses whatever happens to still be in memory from the last time it needed such a list. Put the 3 together, and you have the ghost glitch, and missing no. And the Mew glitch, and the item duplication trick, and half of the strangest phenomena in Pokémon history, and all of them run through Lavender Town. Because the encounter that most reliably poisons that memory is the one on the 6th floor of the Pokémon Tower. Think about what that means in practical terms, because it is the closest thing to real magic these games contain. A player fights the nameless ghost in the graveyard tower. Then they leave, cross the region, and walk along a beach on a volcanic island 400 kilometers away. And out of the shallow water comes something that is not a Pokémon. A tall column of scrambled pixels, a mess of graphical debris with a name that is not a name. A species the game cannot describe because there is nothing there to describe. Missing num, and when you encounter it, the sixth item in your bag multiplies to over 100, and your Pokédex corrupts, and the game's Hall of Fame records begin to fill with garbage, and in some cases the save file never recovers. An unnamed ghost in a graveyard, encountered on the 6th floor of a tower in a town whose name means remembrance, reaches across the entire region through the memory of the machine and produces a creature made of nothing that damages your permanent record of everything you have ever done. You could not have written that intentionally. It emerged out of a memory constraint and a missing data table on a cartridge with less storage than a modern photograph. And yet, it is the most thematically perfect thing in the entire franchise, and the players who found it in 1998 by trading rumors in schoolyards understood instinctively that it belonged to the tower, which is why so many of the earliest versions of the missing no. Rumor involved ghosts and Lavender Town and the idea that the cartridge was haunted rather than simply flawed. And there is more down there. There is a great deal more. Because the same seams that produce missing no produce a whole population of things with no proper existence, and several of them have names that are not names, and one of them is a Pokémon with a level so high the game cannot render it, and one of them is a creature stitched together out of the sound data for a Kangaskhan, and one of them, if you go looking in the right way, is the most famous secret in the history of video games, sitting in a strip of grass north of Cerulean City, waiting for a boy with a ghost in his memory. Because the Mew glitch is the other half of the 6th floor, and almost nobody realizes it is the same phenomenon wearing a different mask. For 20 years, from the moment the first games shipped, children insisted that Mew was in Kanto, not as a promotional giveaway at an event, in the game, findable, catchable, under the truck at Vermilion Harbor, or on the SS Anne, or in a specific patch of grass, or at the top of a building. Every playground in the world had its own version, and every version was wrong, and adults dismissed all of it as the collective fantasy of a generation that wanted the pink one so badly it had hallucinated a method. And then it turned out that Mew was in Kanto, catchable, in the original cartridges, and the method involved exactly the same corruption of encounter memory that produced the nameless ghost in the tower. The technique, stripped down, works like this. You begin a battle you never finish. You trigger a trainer's line of sight and then escape the region before the battle can begin, by flying away in the exact frame after the exclamation mark appears. That leaves the game holding an instruction it cannot complete. Then you fight something else, somewhere else, and when that second battle ends, the unfinished instruction from the first one resolves against whatever data is now sitting in the space where a species number should be. And if the numbers line up, out of the grass comes Mew, at level 7, wild, in the region where the Mansion Diaries said it was discovered in a jungle on the other side of the world. The genetic ancestor of every Pokémon in existence was hiding inside the seams of the machine the entire time, reachable only by leaving something unresolved and walking away from it. And the mechanism you use to reach it is the same category of mechanism that the ghost on the 6th floor of the Pokémon Tower exploits by accident, every single time you meet her. Sit with the shape of that for a moment, because it is the kind of thing that only happens when a piece of art is built under conditions so tight that the constraints start telling the truth. In the first generation of Pokémon, the ancestor of all life and the unnameable dead are accessible through the same crack. Both of them live in the gap, where the machine's memory of one thing bleeds into the next. To reach either, you have to interrupt something and refuse to finish it. And the third thing that lives in that gap is a Kangaskhan. This is one of those details that sounds invented, and is not. Among the glitch creatures the first generation produces are several that carry the audio and partial data of other species, and the one that has fascinated people for decades is the glitch that produces a missing no, wearing Kangaskhan's cry. In some versions of the encounter, the corrupted creature that appears on that Cinnabar coastline is internally identified with data belonging to a Kangaskhan, and when it appears on screen, it screams in her voice. Now remember the theory. Remember the oldest fan theory in Kanto, the one that says a Cubone is a Kangaskhan's orphan child, and that the thing in the pouch is the thing under the skull. Then look at what the cartridge itself does with those two species. The ghost of a dead Marowak, encountered in a graveyard, corrupts the machine's memory. And what comes out of that corrupted memory, on a beach on the far side of the region, is a formless thing that cannot be named and cannot be classified, and cries with the voice of a mother Pokémon. None of that was designed. All of it is in there. Players in 1998 could not have known any of the technical reasons. They had no disassembly, no memory viewers, no internet worth speaking of. They had a beach, a ghost, a rumor, and a thing that came out of the water screaming in the wrong voice. And they concluded that the game was haunted. And I have spent a long time thinking about whether they were wrong, and my honest answer is that they were more right than the people who laughed at them. Because a haunting, in the oldest sense of the word, is not a spirit, it is a residue. It is the past refusing to be overwritten, leaking through into a place it does not belong, appearing where it should not, in a form nobody can identify, and damaging the record. That is precisely, mechanically, exactly what the first generation of Pokémon does when you fight the ghost in Lavender Town and then go for a walk on the beach. Which brings us to the question that nobody who tells these stories ever asks, and it is the most unsettling one in the entire town's history. Why does the tower get taken away? Because it does. 3 years after the events of the first games, in the era of gold and silver, the player returns to Kanto, and Kanto has moved on. Not dramatically. The region has aged the way a real place ages, in small municipal decisions. The Cinnabar Gym is gone because the volcano finally did what volcanoes do. The power plant on Route 10 is being repaired. Saffron's magnet train station has opened. Viridian's gym has a new leader because the old one walked away from everything after his empire collapsed. And in Lavender Town, the Pokémon Tower is gone. It is not destroyed. It was not burned or condemned or knocked down by a disaster. It was replaced. Standing in the exact position where the 7-story graveyard used to be is the Kanto Radio Tower, a broadcasting facility. Same footprint, same hill, same town, different purpose entirely. Where mediums once stood in the dark listening to the dead, there are now transmitters sending music and quiz shows and weather reports out across the region. The graves were moved. There is a new building for them, smaller, at ground level, and it is called the House of Memories in some translations, and the Soul House in others, and it sits quietly on the edge of town with rows of stones inside, and a few people tending them. It is respectful. It is clean. It is undeniably a downgrade. 7 floors became 1 room. And here is the part that stops me every time. The ghosts are gone. Walk into the House of Memories in the Johto era, and there is no ghastly drifting between the stones. Nothing possesses anyone. Nothing blocks a staircase, because there is no staircase. No white hands. No unnameable presences. No channelers. Anywhere in the town. The single most haunted location in the history of the Pokémon world was rezoned into a radio station, and the haunting simply stopped. The obvious reading is the cheerful one. The Marowak was put to rest. The rockets were driven out. Mr. Fuji's work was completed, and the town healed and moved on, and the new tower is a symbol of a place that has stopped grieving and started living, broadcasting instead of listening. That is a genuinely beautiful reading, and I think it is partly true, because Johto's Kanto is a region in recovery everywhere you look. But there is a second reading, and it is the reason people still argue about this town, in threads that run for hundreds of pages. Nobody asked the dead. Consider what actually happened, in civic terms. A regional authority decided that the most valuable use of that hill was as a transmission site, because a hill is a good place to put an antenna. They removed a 7-story memorial containing generations of graves. They consolidated it into a single-story building on cheaper ground, and they built infrastructure on top of the site, and the infrastructure's entire function is to fill the air, constantly, in every direction, with noise. The tower that used to be a place of silence is now the loudest object in the region. And here is the detail that turns that from a coincidence into something with a shape. The radio tower in Lavender Town broadcasts a specific set of channels, and one of them is unlike the others. Tune a radio in the Johto era to the right frequency, and what comes out is not music. It is a sound sometimes called the Pokémon channel, and sometimes, in the fan community, simply the Buenas Password Band, or the Unknown channel, depending on region and version. In particular, in the ruins to the north, there is a station that broadcasts nothing but a strange, atonal, arrhythmic signal, and when you turn it on inside the ruins of Alph, the walls respond, and the unknown come through. A radio station in the Pokémon world can be used to call things out of the walls. That is established. That is a mechanic. Somewhere in Johto, there is a frequency that makes ancient symbol creatures materialize out of stone. And in Lavender Town, a broadcasting facility was constructed directly on top of a mass grave, and it transmits day and night. Nothing in the game says anything happened as a result. The town is peaceful. The House of Memories is quiet. But the arrangement of facts is one of the most quietly ominous things in the franchise. In the first generation, spirits gathered on that hill so densely that a lens had to be engineered to see them. In the second generation, the hill is an antenna. Whatever drew the Marowak across Kanto to the 6th floor of that tower, whatever the channelers were tuning themselves to receive, was replaced by a transmitter operating on the same site, and the only thing that changed was the direction of the signal. I want to say something here about Mr. Fuji, because his absence in the later era is one of the small aching details that most players never notice. In the Johto games, when you visit Lavender Town, he is not in his house. In some versions, the volunteer Pokémon house is gone entirely, and the building that replaced it is the House of Memories, and the person tending the graves is not him. He is simply no longer there. The games do not tell you what happened. There is no line of dialogue explaining that he passed away, no memorial with his name, no character who mentions him with a sigh. The old man who walked into a tower full of criminals alone to protect the graves of animals, who kept a flute that wakes the sleeping, who may or may not have built the most powerful creature in the world and spent the rest of his life atoning for it in a small room by a graveyard, is simply absent from the record 3 years later, in a town whose name means, "I will not forget you." Somebody was forgotten in Lavender Town after all, and it was the man who ran the memorial. Now let me take you out of Kanto, because the tower is not unique, and the way other regions handle their dead is the clearest light anyone has ever shown on what Lavender Town actually is. Every region built one, every single one, and no two of them are the same, and the differences tell you everything about the people who built them. Go south and west to Hoenn, to a rocky island off the coast, and you find Mount Pyre. It is the closest relative of the Pokémon Tower, and the most beautiful of all of them. A mountain used as a graveyard, with the graves outdoors, on the slopes, among the grass and the wind and the rain. There is a building at the base with stones inside it, and then the path leads up the mountain itself, and the graves continue in the open air, all the way to the summit, and the higher you climb, the older they get, and the wind gets stronger, and eventually you are standing at the peak of a mountain of tombstones, with the sea on every side. The difference between Mount Pyre and the Pokémon Tower is the difference between two philosophies of grief. Kanto built upward, indoors, in a narrow shaft with a roof on it, stacking sorrow in a controlled interior space, with volunteers on the ground floor and mediums on the third. Hoenn laid its dead on a hillside and let the weather in. And the ghosts on Mount Pyre behave completely differently as a result. They are present, they are numerous, you battle Shuppet and Duskull among the stones, but there is no sense of pressure, no possession, no white hands, no unnameable thing on the 6th floor. The mountain breathes. Nothing accumulates. At the top, an old couple lives in a small house, guarding 2 ancient orbs that can wake the titans of land and sea. Which is to say, Hoenn also put its most dangerous relics in the care of elderly people at a graveyard, exactly as Kanto did with the flute, and I do not think that is a coincidence in either case. In this world, the objects capable of waking sleeping things are entrusted to the people who live closest to the dead, because they are the only ones who have learned not to use them. Go north to Sinnoh, and Sinnoh does something different again, and much worse. Sinnoh has the old chateau. There is no graveyard in Eterna Forest. There is a mansion, standing in the middle of the trees, fully furnished, structurally intact, and completely abandoned. And unlike the burned lab on Cinnabar, nothing appears to have happened to it. There is no fire damage, there is no sign of struggle, the tables are still there, the chairs are still there. There is cutlery in the dining room, the lights work in some rooms, and there is nobody, and nobody in the region will say why, and the forest has grown up around it as though the building were a rock. Wander it at night and you meet Ghastly and Haunter and Gengar, the Kanto trio, transplanted into a Sinnoh house that nobody will discuss. And then there are the two things in that mansion that are not encounters and not items and not part of any quest, and which are, without much competition, the most genuinely frightening pieces of content in the mainline games. In one of the upstairs rooms there is a television. If you examine it, the screen shows nothing. Examine it again, and something looks back. A face, or the impression of one, appearing on the screen for a fraction of a second before the text moves on and tells you that you must have imagined it. And in one of the corridors, if you walk it at the right moment, a girl in old-fashioned clothing appears at the far end and stands there, and then is not there. No battle initiates. No dialogue plays. There is no item, no reward, no acknowledgement. She simply appears in a hallway and vanishes, and the game never mentions her again for the rest of its 200 hours, and the player is left standing in an empty corridor in a house in a forest. That is Sinnoh's answer to Lavender Town. Kanto built a tower and hired mediums and admitted openly that the dead are present and reachable. Sinnoh had a house full of something and locked the door and let the forest cover it and put a girl in the hallway who is not on any list. And then there is Unova, and Unova's monument is, I think, the most sophisticated commentary on the whole subject in the franchise, because it fixed the exact flaw in the Kanto model. The Celestial Tower is a tall building on a hillside, and like the Pokémon Tower, it is a graveyard, and you climb it floor by floor. And like the Pokémon Tower, there are ghost types drifting between the stones and grieving trainers standing among them, and the parallels are so direct that it can only be deliberate. Climb it, and you will find people kneeling at graves. One of them will tell you about the Pokémon they lost. The tone is gentler and sadder than anything in Kanto, and the building fills up with a kind of hush as you rise. And at the top there is a bell. That is the difference. That is the entire difference, and it is enormous. At the summit of Unova's Memorial Tower, there is a large bronze bell, and you are invited to ring it. And when you do, the sound rolls out across the whole region, and the game tells you that the tone of the bell reflects the state of your heart, and that the spirits of the departed are soothed by it. Kanto's tower had a locked staircase, a screaming mother, a corporate lens, and a criminal occupation at the top. Unova's tower has a bell that any traveler can ring for free, and the act of ringing it is the entire reward, and the dead are comforted rather than exorcised. The difference between those two designs is the difference between a culture that has learned how to grieve and one that has not. Kanto in the first generation had no ritual. It had a building and volunteers and mediums who put themselves in the way as human receivers because there was no other channel available, and when something went wrong on the 6th floor, the only solution the region could produce was a 10-year-old with a machine and a Pokémon that could fight a ghost. Unova hung a bell in the tower and let everybody use it. And then there is Alola, far to the south. And Alola's contribution is the one that closes the loop we started, with the burning bone and the funeral dance. Alola has no graveyard tower at all. What it has is a culture in which the dead are simply part of the ordinary furniture of life. There is a species there called Mimikyu, and I want to end this stretch of the night with it, because Mimikyu is what happens when the ghost stories of Kanto grow up. Mimikyu wears a costume, a crude, handmade, homemade rag with a drawn-on face, made to resemble a Pikachu. The entries tell you it made the costume itself, decades ago, out of a desire to be loved the way that famous yellow creature is loved. They tell you it lives in dark places and avoids the sun. And they tell you, without any hedging at all, that its true body beneath the cloth is so horrifying that anyone who sees it dies of shock, and that a scientist who once lifted the rag to look underneath was found dead of a mysterious illness. A creature so lonely that it sewed a disguise of a popular animal so that people might want it near them, and so unbearable underneath that looking at it kills. We started tonight with a small creature that wears its dead mother's skull because it cannot bear to be without her, and whose face nobody in history has ever seen. Generations later, in a chain of islands on the other side of the world, the franchise invented a second creature that wears a cover over its face because it cannot bear to be alone, and whose face nobody has ever survived seeing. The same idea, 20 years apart. Both of them designed around the same simple, terrible observation, which is that the loneliest things in this world protect themselves by putting something else's face over their own, and that we love them for it, and that we have never once been shown what is underneath. And that is the thread we have to follow back into the tower now, because we have been treating Team Rocket as a plot obstacle all night, and they are not one. They are the answer to a question nobody in Kanto ever asked out loud. What were they doing in there? Go back to the 7th floor of the Pokémon Tower and look at the scene properly. Grunts in black uniforms, standing among headstones, in a working memorial, in a town of 6 houses, not passing through, occupying. They came up 7 flights of stairs past the volunteers and the graves and the possessed mediums, and they set up a position at the top, and they were still there when a child arrived, which means they had been there long enough for the town to know about it, and long enough for an old man to walk up and try to stop them and fail. An organization does not do that casually. Team Rocket, as an outfit, is remarkably rational everywhere else you meet it. Every other operation they run has an obvious commercial logic, and you can reconstruct the business case in about 10 seconds. Mount Moon is a mineral extraction site, because moonstones are rare evolutionary catalysts with an enormous resale value, and they were lying in the rock. The power plant is theft of electricity, and, in the Johto era, an attempt to capture a legendary bird that lives inside a thunderstorm, which is the single most valuable asset in the region. The Celadon Game Corner is money laundering and a front, with a hideout underneath it, which is exactly what you would build if you needed a large cash business to explain your income. The Sylph Company takeover is a hostile acquisition of the region's dominant technology firm, executed with grunts instead of lawyers, and the prize is patents and prototypes and the master ball. Every one of those is a plan. Now try to write the business case for the Pokémon Tower. You cannot, not cleanly, and that is the point. Because there is nothing in a graveyard to steal. There are no minerals in that hill. There are no prototypes on the 4th floor. The tombstones have no resale value. The only assets in that building are the dead, the mediums who commune with them, and the ghost types that live in the dark between the graves. The game gives you exactly one piece of testimony, and it comes from a boy in a house near the tower, and it is 4 or 5 lines long. He tells you the Rockets killed a Marowak. He tells you she was a mother. He tells you she died protecting her child. And in the wider fabric of the story, the reason given is that they wanted the Cubone, or wanted whatever the Cubone represented, and she would not let them have it. So the operation had a target, and the target was a small creature that wears a skull. Why would a criminal syndicate mount a floor-by-floor occupation of a memorial building to obtain Cubone? Here is where the theories start, and unlike the syndrome, these ones are built entirely out of things the games actually contain. The first theory is the commercial one, and it is the least supernatural and possibly the ugliest. Cubone's Bone Club is not a metaphor. It is an item-adjacent object with real properties in this world, and in the wider lore, bones from that lineage are treated as tools. There is a held item introduced later, called the Thick Club, and the games are perfectly clear about what it is. It is a bone, obtained from that species, and when a Cubone or Marowak holds it, their physical power doubles. Doubles. There is no other held item in the franchise that produces an effect of that magnitude for a single family, and in the same generation, a rare bone exists as a valuable collectible, and in Alola, the ritual bones are treated as sacred objects. So there is a market for bones. There is a documented, mechanically implemented, price-bearing market for the skeletal remains of that specific evolutionary line, in a world where a syndicate exists whose entire purpose is to convert living creatures into inventory. Read the Marowak scene again with that in mind. Men came into the eastern roots of Kanto looking for a species whose bones are worth more than the animal. They found a mother and a child. The mother fought, they killed her, and the child put on her skull, which is to say the child picked up the merchandise and wore it, and the men then followed that child up a hill into a graveyard, because the thing they wanted was still walking around. That reading makes the Pokémon Tower occupation make perfect sense as a business decision, and it is genuinely difficult to sit with once you have thought it through, because it means the darkest thing in Lavender Town is not a ghost at all. It is a supply chain. The second theory goes the other way entirely, and it is the one that has the most textual support in the strangest places. It says Team Rocket was not there for the bones, it was there for the ghosts. Consider what Giovanni's organization actually collects, when you look at the whole picture across both eras. They pursue Mewtwo's genetic lineage on Cinnabar, funding a laboratory that engineers a psychic weapon out of a jungle fossil. They pursue the legendary birds. In the Johto era, they attempt to force the evolution of Pokémon using radio waves, which is the single most revealing thing they ever do, and we will come back to it in a moment, because it is the key to this entire chapter. They are not a gang of thieves. They are an applied research organization with a criminal delivery mechanism, and what they are researching, consistently, in every operation, is the forcible extraction of power from living things. And a ghost is a Pokémon that has passed through death and retained its abilities. If you were an organization whose stated goal is dominance through the exploitation of Pokémon power, and you learned that in a small town in eastern Kanto, there is a building where the dead demonstrably persist, where spirits are strong enough to seize control of human bodies, where an unmeasurable presence can stop a fully equipped trainer on a staircase with nothing but its refusal to be identified, you would not send grunts to steal tombstones. You would send them to find out how it works. And the piece of evidence that makes this reading very hard to dismiss is the Sylph scope itself. Because the Rockets had it. It was in the basement of the Celadon hideout when you took it, in the possession of a rocket boss, which means the Syndicate had already acquired the region's only ghost detection instrument before the tower operation began. That is not opportunistic theft. That is procurement. They obtained the equipment first, and then occupied the site, in that order, which is the order in which a research operation does things, and not the order in which a robbery does things. Whatever they were doing on the upper floors of that tower, they brought the right tool for it. And then there is the third theory, and it is the smallest and the saddest, and it requires nothing supernatural and no market analysis. It says the tower was not the target at all. It says the Rockets chased a Cubone up a hill after killing its mother in a field, for a reason as mundane as any poacher's, and that the Cubone ran to the only place in Kanto where the dead are kept, because something in its grief pulled it there, and the men followed it inside, and once inside they realized the building was full of possessed mediums and unattended graves, and no authority of any kind, and they simply stayed, the way opportunists always stay in a place with no locks. That version has no grand plan in it. It suggests the most haunted event in Kanto's history happened because a criminal enterprise wandered into a graveyard, chasing a child, and found that nobody was going to stop them. I have gone back and forth on which of the three I believe for a long time, and I have landed somewhere uncomfortable, which is that the Johto era answers the question, and the answer is the second one. Because in the Johto era, Team Rocket seizes a radio tower. Not the one in Lavender, the one in Goldenrod City, in the heart of Johto, 3 years later, after Giovanni has vanished, and the organization has reassembled itself without him. And what they do with it is the most explicit statement of purpose that group ever makes. They take over the broadcasting facility, they climb to the top, and they use the transmitter to send out a signal on a specific frequency. And the purpose of that signal is to reach Pokémon at a distance and change them. The stated intention is to force evolution, and to call their leader back, and to reach the Pokémon of an entire region through the air, all at once, without touching a single one of them. That is the whole thesis of that organization laid bare. They believe that power in living creatures can be reached remotely, addressed, tuned, triggered. They believe the right frequency does what a trainer's years of work does, and they proved the principle works, because the signal they broadcast has real effects in the world of that game, and elsewhere, in the same region, a different frequency, broadcast from a different tower, calls the unknown out of stone walls. Now put that beside Lavender Town, and the picture assembles itself with a click you can almost hear. 3 years before Goldenrod, that same organization occupied a building where the dead were provably reachable, having first acquired the instrument that lets you see them. 3 years after Lavender Town, that same organization occupied a building that transmits, having concluded that living things can be reached and altered at a distance through a signal. And in between those two events, the hill in Lavender Town, the one where the graves were, the one where the medium stood, was converted into a radio tower. I am not going to tell you the games connect those three facts, because they do not. There is no line of dialogue anywhere in the franchise that draws that line. But the facts are all canon, all three of them, sitting in 2 games released a generation apart, and the shape they make when you lay them next to each other is the reason people have never been able to leave this town alone. The channelers were receivers, standing in the dark, tuning themselves to something. Team Rocket studied that building. And then a transmitter was built on the same ground. And a criminal organization went on to hijack a different transmitter and use it to reach into living creatures and change what they were. Somebody in Kanto learned something on the 6th and 7th floors of the Pokémon Tower, and 3 years later they were broadcasting. Now, before the night gets much deeper, I want to widen the lens, because everything we have talked about tonight rests on a foundation that people rarely examine directly. We have been treating the Pokédex as a reference book. It is not. It is the single most disturbing document in this fictional world, and Lavender Town is simply the place where its contents become architecture. Because the entries do not stop with Cubone and Gengar, they have never stopped. Every generation has added more, and they have gotten bolder, not gentler. And if you read them in sequence, you can watch a franchise slowly admitting what it built. Drifloon. A purple balloon with a smiling face and a cross-shaped pattern on its front, and small cloud-like arms. Its entries say it is formed from the spirits of people and Pokémon gathered together. They say it drifts through towns looking for children, and that it takes a child by the hand, and that it tries to carry them away to the afterlife, and that it is called the signpost for wandering spirits. And then, in the detail that always stops me, they say that it fails, because it is not strong enough, and that a child who takes its hand will simply drag it along behind them like a toy. A creature made of assembled dead people, which comes to town looking for a child's hand to hold, and is too weak to complete the abduction, and so ends up being played with by the child it came to take. That is in a children's encyclopedia. It has been for 18 years. Phantump. A small stump with a green wisp. The entries say, these are the spirits of children who became lost in the forest and died there, and that they possess tree stumps, and that they cry out in imitation of a child's voice, to lure people deeper into the woods. Trevenant. Its evolution. A tree with legs and a hollow face. The entries say it can control other trees at will, that it uses its roots to trap intruders, and that people who cut down trees in its forest are not seen again. And then the line that recontextualizes everything, which is that it is kind to the Pokémon that live in its body, treating them as its own. So the lost child who died in the woods grows up into the forest itself, hollow, full of other small creatures, sheltering them, and killing anyone who harms the trees. That is not a monster. That is a grief that became a habitat. Banette. A doll with a zipper and a nail. The entries say it was a plush toy that was discarded by the child who owned it, and that the resentment of being thrown away gave it life, and that it wanders at night searching for the child who abandoned it, and that it curses that child by driving a pin into a doll of its own. Shedinja. Possibly the single strangest thing in the entire National Encyclopedia. When an Incada evolves, it leaves behind its shell, and if you have a spare space in your party, the shell is a Pokémon. It has one hit point, permanently, and it can never have more. It does not breathe. It does not move except to float. And the entry tells you not to look into the hole on its back, because if you do, it will steal your spirit through it. A hollow shell that a living thing walked out of, which becomes a creature that takes your soul if you look inside it, and which arrives in your party for free, quietly, without being caught, if you happen to have room. Spiritomb. A green swirl of faces bound to an odd keystone, and the entry says it is 108 spirits fused together and imprisoned in that rock as punishment for something it did 500 years ago. 108, which in Buddhist tradition is the number of worldly desires, the number of tolls of the bell at the turn of the year, the number of beads on a full rosary, the wickedness of 108 lives sealed in a stone that was left in a hole in the ground behind a tower in Sinnoh, and you can dig it up. Froslas. And this is the one that people discover last and never forget. A Snorunt that reaches a certain point can become this, but only if it is female, and the entries say that it is the spirit of a woman who died lost in the mountains in the snow, and that it freezes travelers solid with its icy breath and takes them home and displays them. Read across all of that and a picture emerges that has nothing to do with creepypasta, and everything to do with deliberate authorship. In this world, the dead do not go anywhere. They persist as a category of being, with types and abilities and habitats and evolutionary lines. A child who dies in a forest becomes a tree. A woman who dies in the mountains becomes a beautiful thing that collects the frozen. A toy that was thrown away becomes a curse with a zipper. A shell becomes a soul taker. 108 sins become a stone in the ground. and a person who dies becomes something that carries their own face in its hands and cries when it looks at it. That is the world in which Lavender Town built a tower. And once you understand that the Pokédex says all of this, the tower stops being a horror set piece and becomes the only rational piece of civic infrastructure in the region. Of course, Kanto built a 7-story memorial in a town whose name means remembrance. Of course, volunteers staff the ground floor. Of course, mediums stand on the 3rd floor listening. In a world where the entries are true, a graveyard is not a symbolic space, it is a populated one. Lavender Town is not superstitious. Lavender Town is the only town in Kanto that is being realistic. And that, I think, is why it has terrified 3 decades of players who could never quite articulate why. It is not the music, though the music helped. It is not the myths, though the myths grew like ivy. It is that in a world of bright roots and cheerful gyms and a bicycle you can buy in a department store, there is one small purple town on a hill that quietly tells you the truth about what happens next, and keeps the light on for it, and hires people to listen. So let us go back inside one more time and look at the people, because there is a group in that tower we have circled all night without ever asking the obvious question about them. Who are the channelers? They are not trainers in the ordinary sense. Every other class of opponent in Kanto tells you what they are by what they wear. Bug catchers have nets and shorts. Fishermen have rods and sit on piers. Sailors are on ships. Gamblers are in the casino. Scientists are in laboratories and power plants. Each one is defined by an occupation that exists in the world, and each one battles you, because battling is what people do in Kanto. The channelers are defined by a practice. They wear white robes, which in Japanese visual language is not a uniform of work, but of ritual, the color of purification, and of the dead. They are found in exactly one building in the entire region. They do not challenge you the way other trainers challenge you, and their defining characteristic is not skill but permeability. Look at what they actually use in battle. Almost every channeler in that tower sends out Ghastly, Haunter, Drowsy, or Cubone. Ghosts and psychics and, in a handful of cases, a small grieving orphan carrying a skull. There is a woman standing in a graveyard in a white robe whose partner is a Cubone, in the building where the Marowak's ghost is standing on the 6th floor. Nobody comments on that. Nobody has ever commented on that. There is a channeler in the Pokémon Tower with the Child of the Dead in her party, and she does not have any dialogue about it. And several of them, when they lose, say something that is easy to skip past, because you are hurrying to the next floor. They say the spirit has left them, or ask what they were doing, or apologize, which means that during the battle they were not present. Something else was using them, and the something else was defeated, and then the woman came back into her own body and found a child standing in front of her, in a dark room full of graves. You just fought a ghost through a woman's body. That is what happens on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors of the Pokémon Tower, repeatedly, as a routine gameplay loop, and the game presents it with no more ceremony than a fight against a bug catcher on Route 2. Now here is the part that has never been explained, and that I find genuinely remarkable, given how carefully the rest of Kanto is built. There is no organization behind them. Nothing in the games establishes who trains a channeler, who ordained them, whether they are paid, whether they belong to a temple, whether they answer to anyone. There is no channeler gym leader. There is no channeler elder. Mr. Fuji is the closest thing to an authority figure among the dead in that town, and he is not one of them. He wears a different robe, he runs a shelter for orphaned Pokémon, and he does not appear to instruct anyone. The channelers simply exist in that building, in numbers, doing an extremely dangerous thing without supervision, in a region that has formal licensing procedures for children who want to carry a Pokémon. Kanto regulates trainers, it does not regulate mediums. And there is one more group in Kanto that deals in mind and spirit, and it is impossible not to look at them once you have looked at the channelers, because they are one city away. Saffron City, Sabrina's gym, the Psychic Gym, and the strangest gym in the region by a considerable margin. Sabrina in the original games is not a sportswoman, she is a phenomenon. Her gym is a lattice of teleport pads that rearrange your position in space, which is to say that the building itself does not obey ordinary geometry, and the trainers inside it are psychics and channelers. Yes, channelers, the same class. The white-robed mediums from the Graveyard Tower in Lavender Town also appear inside the Psychic Gym in Saffron City, which is the only place in Kanto other than the tower where you will find them. That is a thread, and nobody has ever pulled it all the way. Because it means the mediums of Lavender Town and the psychics of Saffron are, institutionally, the same community, a practice that involves opening the mind to things outside it, which manifests in one city as a licensed gym with a leader and a badge, and in the next town along as a group of unsupervised women standing in the dark, in a mass grave, letting the dead wear them. And in the lore around Sabrina, the price of that ability is stated plainly. She was a child, with powers she did not choose. In the anime's telling, and in the strange hints the games leave, her abilities grew so strong that they consumed the ordinary part of her, and what was left was cold, still, frightening to be near, and split. In the animated version of her story, her psychic power literally divided her, leaving a child self carrying a doll, and an adult self who had forgotten how to feel anything. And the resolution of her story is not a battle, but a reunification. Two towns, side by side, connected by an underground path. In one of them, opening yourself up costs you your body temporarily, and something else drives it. In the other, opening yourself up cost a girl her childhood permanently and split her in half. And the same class of white-robed practitioner works in both buildings. Kanto has a spiritual tradition. It is not organized, it is not protected. It has no clergy and no doctrine that anyone will describe to you. And the two places it congregates are a graveyard and a gym. And the region's response to it has been to hand out badges in one location and to do absolutely nothing at all in the other. Now I want to tell you about the night Ash Ketchum died, because the animated series went somewhere with Lavender Town that the games never dared, and it did it in its first season, in an episode that still gets brought up every year by adults who watched it when they were 7 and have never fully filed it away. The episode takes place in the Pokémon Tower, and it opens with the tower already established as the place where the dead are, and Ash and his friends go inside to catch a ghost type, and the tone of it is playful for about 4 minutes. There are tricks. There is a candle that moves. There is a Haunter and a Gengar performing gags, sticking their tongues out, making faces. And the animation is exaggerated and funny, and clearly designed to diffuse a child's fear. And then the chandelier falls. It comes down on top of Ash and his Pikachu, and the screen does what the show has never done before or since in that way. And when the dust settles, there are two translucent figures floating above the wreckage, looking down at their own bodies on the floor. Ash is a ghost. Pikachu is a ghost. And the show does not walk it back for the rest of the episode. What follows is the single most tonally bizarre sequence in the history of the franchise, and I mean that as praise. Because Ash, having just died in a graveyard tower, does not panic. He discovers, within about 30 seconds, that being dead is fun. He can float, he can pass through walls, he can fly. And so, he and Pikachu, both dead, go and play with Haunter and Gengar, and the four of them float out over the town in the dark and do impossible things. And Ash laughs, and the ghosts laugh, and the music is light, and it is one of the most joyful sequences in the whole first season, and the entire premise of it is that a 10-year-old boy has been killed by falling masonry in a building full of graves and is now playing with the local dead. His friends, meanwhile, are downstairs with his body, and the show cuts to them being appropriately horrified, and then cuts back to him having the best night of his life. He goes back, eventually. Haunter, who has taken a liking to him, helps put him back, and the episode ends with Haunter following him to Saffron City, where it uses its powers not to fight Sabrina, but to make her laugh, which breaks the psychic hold on her and reunites the two halves of her. So, in the animated continuity, the way the psychic gym leader is healed is that a ghost from the Lavender Town graveyard makes her laugh, and the way that ghost met the protagonist is that the protagonist briefly died. Nobody has ever explained what happened in that tower in any deeper sense. The show does not treat it as a near-death experience or a dream or a psychic illusion. There is no line where a character says it was not real. Ash's spirit left his body in the Pokémon Tower and came back, and the series proceeded to 1,000 more episodes without ever mentioning it again. And the same series, in the same first season, went back to the same well twice more, and both times the results were stranger than anyone remembers. There is the episode with the Marowak, in which the Pokémon Tower's story is retold with the ghost of a Mother Marowak defending the tower and Team Rocket present in the building, and the resolution involves the spirit being calmed rather than defeated. And there is the story on Maiden's Peak, which is not Lavender Town at all, but is its spiritual sibling, and which is the one that upset people most. Maiden's Peak is a coastal town with a festival and a rock formation shaped like a woman looking out to sea. The legend is that 2,000 years ago, a young woman stood on that cliff, waiting for a man who had gone to war and who never returned, and that she waited until she turned to stone. Every summer, during the festival, a beautiful young woman appears in town, and men fall in love with her, and then she is gone, and the painting in the local temple of the maiden is the same face. And in that episode, one of the main characters is taken, not menaced, taken. He follows her willingly, and is found the next morning at the base of the cliff, and the show plays it as romance and horror at the same time, and the eventual explanation involves a ghastly using illusions, and yet the episode is careful to leave the door open, because the painting is still the same face, and the stone is still shaped like a woman, and nobody explains why the ghost knew what she looked like. That is the animated series in the same season as a joke about a talking cat, delivering a 2,000-year-old story about a woman who waited on a cliff until she became geology. And then there is the strangest artifact of all in this whole territory, and it is not a legend, and it is not an episode. It is a change. When the first games were remade, decades later, in the Let's Go versions, the developers had to decide what to do with the Pokémon Tower, and what they did tells you exactly how the modern franchise feels about what it built in 1996. The tower is still there. The graves are still there, Mr. Fuji is still there, the Marowak is still there, and the Sylph Scope is still required, and the rockets still occupy the upper floors. All of it survived, which is remarkable in itself given how much else was smoothed over in those games. But the channelers are different. In the modern version, the possessed mediums standing in the dark are handled with a lighter touch, and the encounter with the ghost is presented with more ceremony, more music, more weight, as though the developers understood that the scene had grown in the intervening 20 years into something much larger than the 4 lines of text it originally consisted of. They knew. That is what the remake tells you. Somewhere in the company there was a conversation about the Marowak on the 6th floor, and about how much of it to keep, and the decision was to keep almost all of it, because by then the scene did not belong to them anymore. It belonged to everyone who had climbed those stairs as a child, with a lens in their bag, and no idea what was about to be identified. And there is one more piece of Lavender Town that has never been resolved, and that almost nobody talks about, and it is my favorite of all of them, because it is the smallest. The town has a poker center, it has a Pokémart, it has a handful of houses, and it has, in the original games, one more building than it needs, and inside it there is a man with a Pokédex-related side quest, and near him, depending on the version, there are people whose dialogue changes, depending on how far into the story you are. And in one of those houses, in the original English text, there is a resident who mentions that the ghosts have been getting worse recently. Recently. That word is doing an enormous amount of work, and nobody in the game ever picks it up. Because it means the tower was not always like this. The possession, the white hands, the presences the channelers describe, the thing on the 6th floor, all of it is described by the residents as a recent escalation. The town's memorial had presumably been standing for generations without requiring anybody to invent a ghost-detecting lens. And then, in the specific window of time in which a criminal syndicate began operating in eastern Kanto, in which poaching increased, in which a laboratory on a volcanic island engineered something out of Mew and lost control of it, in which a mother Marowak was killed in a field, the ghosts got worse. The tower did not become haunted on its own. Something in Kanto changed, and the graveyard responded. And once you notice the timing, you cannot help noticing what else was happening in that exact period. Mewtwo escaped from Cinnabar and vanished. Team Rocket's operations reached their peak. A 10-year-old was licensed and sent out onto Route 1. The 3 legendary birds were being pursued. Sylph was developing a ball that never fails. The region was, in the space of a couple of years, doing more damage to the natural order than it had done in the previous century. And the building where the dead are kept got louder. If you want a unified theory of Lavender Town, that is the closest I can get to one. The tower is a barometer. It is the one place in Kanto that registers the pressure. When the region is quiet, it is a graveyard with volunteers, and small stones, and people who bring flowers. When the region starts tearing things apart for profit, the tower fills up, and the mediums cannot hold what comes through, and hands appear on shoulders, and something arrives on the 6th floor that no instrument can name. And 3 years later, when it was over, when the syndicate had collapsed, and Giovanni had walked away from his own gym, and the region had begun to repair itself, the tower emptied out. That is the detail that convinced me. The ghosts did not leave because the tower was demolished. Look at the order of events. The rockets are driven out of Kanto. Giovanni disbands the organization. And then the tower comes down, and a radio mast goes up, and the graves move to a quiet room at ground level, and nothing in that room is haunted at all. The dead settled when the living stopped. Which leaves exactly one thing unaccounted for in this entire town, and it has been sitting in the corner of the room all night, and it is time to look at it directly. The 7th floor. Because there is a floor above the ghost. We spend so much time on the 6th floor that we forget the tower has 7, and the 7th is where Mr. Fuji was, and where the rockets were, and where the game ends the sequence. And the question nobody asks is what an old man was doing up there in the first place. He did not go up there to fight. He is not a trainer of consequence, and the game never gives him a battle. He did not go up there to retrieve anything, because he leaves with nothing. And he did not go up there to rescue the Cubone, because the Cubone is not there. He went up to the top of the tower and stayed there, alone, in the highest room of the graveyard, while criminals occupied the floors below him, and a ghost that no machine could identify stood on the stairs. And when a child finally reached him, he was still alive, and the first thing he did was take that child home and give them a flute. I have thought about that for a long time, and there is only one reading of it that satisfies me. He was not trapped. He was holding a vigil. The top floor of the Pokémon Tower is the oldest part of the memorial, the part nearest the sky, where the earliest graves are. Somebody has to be there when the building is under threat. Not to fight, to be present. That is what a vigil is. And it is the thing the channelers do standing up in the dark on the lower floors. And it is the thing the volunteers do at the desk on the first floor. And it is the thing the town does simply by existing on that hill with a sign at the entrance that mentions only a color. Kanto did not build a fortress around its dead. It built a stairwell and a room at the top, and it filled the building with people whose entire method is to remain in place and pay attention. And when men with weapons came up the stairs, the region's response was one old man sitting on the floor of the highest room, refusing to leave. That is what the tower actually is, and it is why every horror story that has ever been attached to this place feels slightly wrong in the mouth once you have spent a night with the real thing. The internet built a legend about hidden frequencies and dead children and erased records, and the town underneath the legend is a small purple settlement where 6 households, a shopkeeper, a group of unsupervised mediums, and one elderly man with a flute stood between an entire criminal enterprise and a room full of tombstones marked Ratata and held. And the flute is the next mystery, because we have mentioned it 3 times tonight and never asked what it actually is. Mr. Fuji gives you the Poke Flute the moment you bring him down from the tower, and the game treats it as a key. There are 2 enormous Snorlax asleep in the middle of major roads in Kanto, one blocking Route 12 just south of Lavender Town, and one blocking Route 16 outside Celadon, and the flute wakes them, and that is the end of the puzzle. But listen to what the game is telling you about sleep in this world. Those Snorlax are not napping. Route 12 has been impassable for long enough that people have built their lives around the obstruction. There are fishermen on the piers who mention it. There is a whole stretch of Kanto's road network that simply does not function because a creature lay down on it and would not wake up, and no amount of shouting, prodding, honking, dynamite, or municipal engineering has moved it. The region's response was not to remove the Snorlax. The region's response was to accept the road closure as permanent. And the only thing on Earth that can end it is a small carved flute in the possession of an old man who lives beside a graveyard. Think about the strength of what that instrument does. In this world, sleep is not a light thing. It is one of the most powerful forces in the setting, and the games have been telling us so from the beginning, in the form of moves that end battles instantly, in creatures whose entire biology is built around consciousness and the loss of it, and in a category of legendary being whose domain is dreaming. Start with Drowsy, because a channeler in the Pokémon Tower will send one out at you, and it belongs to this story. Drowsy eats dreams. That is not a poetic description, it is the mechanism the entries describe. It puts a person to sleep and then consumes what they dream, through the nose, and it prefers the dreams of children because children's dreams taste better. There is an entry that says if you sleep beside one, it will occasionally show you the dreams it has eaten from other people. There is an entry that says it will not eat a bad dream, and will leave a person alone if their dreams are unpleasant, which is a strange sort of mercy. Then Hypno, its evolution, and this is one of the 2 or 3 most notorious entries ever printed. Hypno carries a pendulum and uses it to induce sleep, and the entry says that it once took a child away while the child was hypnotized, and the wording in various versions makes it clear that this was not a rescue. In some translations it says it took the child home. It says that when Hypno is hungry it will hypnotize anyone it comes across, and that there have been incidents. There is an official Pokémon whose documented behavior includes the abduction of a hypnotized child, and it is a common encounter, and its pre-evolution is used by white-robed mediums in a graveyard tower in Lavender Town. And then, generations later, the franchise built the top of that pyramid, and it is the reason a great many people who grew up on these games still cannot go into a certain lakeside town in Sinnoh at night without feeling something. Darkrai. The entries do not hedge. Darkrai causes nightmares, not frightens, not haunts. It puts anyone in its vicinity into a deep sleep and gives them terrible dreams, and it does so involuntarily, as a byproduct of existing. It cannot help it. That detail matters enormously, and it is the reason Darkrai is one of the most sympathetic legendary Pokémon ever designed. It is not malicious, it is contagious. Its presence in a town means the town stops sleeping properly, and so it lives alone on an island that cannot be reached, without a ticket that was never officially distributed in most of the world. And the island is called New Moon Island, and it has one tree on it, and nothing else. A creature exiled to an empty island because being near it gives people nightmares, and which the games place on a strip of land with a single tree. And on the mainland, in the town of Kanalav, there is a boy in a bed who will not wake up. That is the quest. A child has fallen into a sleep from which no one can rouse him, tormented, sweating, crying out, and his father is at the bedside and cannot help him, and the only cure is an item from the world of dreams itself, and to obtain it, you have to enter the boy's nightmare. Kanto solved its sleeping problem with a flute. Sinnoh solved its sleeping problem by sending a child into another child's nightmare to retrieve a feather. Which finally lets me say the thing I have been building toward, and it is the reason a video like this exists at all, and the reason so many of you are here tonight rather than reading something. Sleep, in the world of Pokémon, is a place. It is not an absence of activity, it is a location with residence. There are creatures that live in it and feed there, creatures that can be reached only from inside it, creatures whose entire domain is the boundary between the sleeping and the waking, and objects and instruments and legendary beings devoted to managing the traffic between the two. Snorlax lies down in it so deeply that a region reroutes its highways. Drowsy climbs into it and eats. Darkrai poisons it by proximity, and a boy in Kanalav gets lost in it and has to be retrieved. And the reason the Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town has always been the most frightening building in that world is that the tower stands on the other boundary, the one after sleep, and in Kanto, those two boundaries are guarded by the same man. The custodian of the graveyard is also the keeper of the instrument that wakes the unwakeable. Whoever Mr. Fuji was before he came to that town, the position he ended up holding is the one that watches both doors. Now, let me take you to a few more of the world's dark places, because the more of them you see, the more clearly you understand what Kanto's tower actually was. And there are 3 in particular that I have not mentioned yet, and each of them adds something. The first is in Sinnoh, and it is the direct descendant of the Pokémon Tower, and almost nobody names it correctly. It is called the Lost Tower. It sits on a route in the middle of the region, 5 floors, stone, cold, and it is a graveyard. Inside, at the top, there are 2 old women, and if you speak to them, they will teach your Pokémon a move, and the move is one of the strangest gifts in the entire franchise. One of them teaches Dream Eater, the other teaches Nightmare. 2 elderly women live at the top of a graveyard tower in Sinnoh, and what they have to give a passing traveler is the ability to consume another creature's dreams, and the ability to inflict a nightmare on something that is already asleep. You climb 5 floors of tombstones to be taught how to hurt the sleeping. Nobody in Sinnoh finds this remarkable. The second place is in Alola, and it is the one that closes the Marowak story completely. In the first town you reach in that region, in Hau'oli, on the outskirts, there is a cemetery. Not a tower, not a mountain, not a mansion. A small municipal cemetery, with grass and stones and a low fence, the most ordinary graveyard in the entire franchise, sitting beside a road in a sunny coastal town. And in that cemetery, at night, in the grass among the graves, you can encounter a Marowak, the Alolan kind, the one with the burning bone, and the ghost typing, and the funeral dance. That is the resolution of the thread we started hours ago, and it happens quietly, with no fanfare, in a starter town. In Kanto, a Marowak's spirit stood on a staircase screaming and had to be put down by a child with a lens. In Alola, the Marowak are in the graveyard voluntarily, at night, dancing with fire among the stones, and the town has built a fence, and mown the grass, and left them to it. The difference is not the Pokémon. The difference is that one culture built a tower, and locked the dead inside it, and hired mediums to absorb the overflow, and the other culture put a cemetery beside a road in the sunshine, and let the half-ghosts have it. The third place is in Sinnoh again, and it is where all of this bottoms out, and it is the closest thing to an underworld that the Pokémon world has ever admitted to. Turnback Cave, and behind it, the Distortion World. Turnback Cave is a place where the rules of navigation stop applying. You walk into a room, and the exits do not correspond to a coherent layout, and the rooms repeat, and if you walk long enough without paying attention, you find yourself back where you began. The name is the warning. Turn back. And the reason the geometry does not work is that the cave is a threshold, and on the other side of it is a realm that exists as the inversion of everything. The Distortion World is not a dungeon. Gravity works in whatever direction the local surface decides. Waterfalls flow upward and sideways. Chunks of landscape hang in a void with no ground beneath them. There is no sky. There is no weather. There is no time, in any usable sense, and the mythology of Sinnoh states that a thing dropped into that world may fall forever, and there is one resident, Giratina. Cast out of the creation myth by the original one for its violence, sealed in the reverse of the world, and given dominion over antimatter and the unseen, the renegade. And here is the piece that connects it back to a purple town in eastern Kanto, and it is a piece of official lore that a great many people have never read. Giratina is spoken of, in Sinnoh's own mythological texts, as watching over the dead. In some traditions of Sinnoh lore, the Distortion World is where things go, not the graveyard, which is where bodies are placed and names are written. The other place, the inverted one. So the world of Pokémon has, in its canon, all of it published, none of it fan invention, the following complete structure. It has a creator who made time, space, and antimatter from itself. It has a god of the reverse world who was exiled for its nature and who is associated with the departed. It has a realm behind a cave where the ordinary laws do not hold and where a thing can fall forever. It has species that are made of the spirits of dead humans, dead children, dead women in the snow, and 108 sins in a rock. It has a creature that assembles itself out of gathered souls and comes to town looking for a child's hand. It has instruments that wake the unwakeable and moves that let you eat a dream and inflict a nightmare, taught by old women at the top of a graveyard. And it has, in one small town in Kanto, a 7-story building where all of that becomes municipal, with a desk on the ground floor and volunteers who keep the carpet clean. Lavender Town is not the haunted exception in a bright world. Lavender Town is the one place in that world where the paperwork is done honestly. And I want to give you one last mystery before the night goes further, because this one is still open, and it is the only Lavender Town adjacent mystery in the entire franchise that is deliberately unresolved by the developers themselves rather than by accident, and it has been sitting there since 2013 with no answer. It is an item, and it is called the Strange Souvenir. In the Kalos region, in a hotel in a coastal city, there is a man who will give you an object. He tells you almost nothing about it. The item's description says that it is a wooden sculpture of a Pokémon, made in a distant region, and that it is of unknown make. That is the entire text. It has no use. It cannot be sold for anything meaningful. It does not unlock a door or trigger an event or complete a set. It sits in your bag as a curiosity. And when the next generation of games came out, set in the tropical islands of Alola, players noticed that the little wooden sculpture resembles the guardian deities of those islands, the Tapu, and the community concluded that the strange souvenir was a plant, an early hint, a piece of foreshadowing left in a bag for 2 years. Except the shape of it has never been definitively matched, and the man who gives it to you says something that has never been explained. He describes it as coming from a faraway place, and in the version of the dialogue that has generated the most discussion, he says he does not know where. That is the sort of thing that has kept people up for a decade, and it is the exact same instinct that produced every single Lavender Town legend we have talked about tonight. An object with no purpose and no origin, given to you by a stranger in a hotel, described as being from somewhere nobody can name. Because that is the real engine of all of this, and it is worth saying plainly before we go on. The reason Lavender Town became the most mythologized location in the history of interactive entertainment is not that its music is dissonant, or that a story about dead children was posted on the internet in 2010, or that a bug in the code lets a graveyard ghost corrupt a beach on the other side of the region. It is that the town is full of unfinished sentences. A resident mentions white hands on shoulders and never brings it up again. A boy mentions a Marowak that was killed and the game never returns to it. A woman is possessed and comes back to herself and asks what happened and no one answers her. A device exists that detects the dead and nobody explains who built it or why, or what they saw during testing. An old man sits on the top floor and never says why he went up there. A species wears its mother's skull, and the encyclopedia notes it the way it notes a diet. A tower gets replaced by a radio mast and the graves move to a small room and nobody in the town remarks on the change. A man's name appears in a burned laboratory, and again in a memorial house, and the two are never linked. Every one of those is a door left ajar, and human beings cannot leave a door ajar. We finish sentences. We always have. That is what folklore is, and always was, long before there were cartridges, when the unfinished sentence was a light on a moor, or a woman on a cliff, or a sound in an orchard at night, and the finishing of it was done out loud, by somebody, to somebody else, in a room like the one you are lying in now. The people who wrote the Syndrome story, and the White Hand story, and Buried Alive, were not hoaxes, most of them. They were finishing a sentence that a small purple town on a hill had started and refused to complete, and they were doing it in exactly the way their great-grandparents would have done it, with the same instincts, using a different medium. And there is a strange comfort in that, at this hour. The tower in Lavender Town has been standing for 30 years in the imagination of millions of people who have never met each other, and in all that time, nobody has managed to explain it, and everybody has tried, and the trying is now bigger than the building. And there is one detail inside that building that I have deliberately saved, because it is the strangest thing in the whole tower, and it took the community years to even notice it was strange. You can defeat the ghost with a toy. Go back to the 6th floor. The unnameable presence, the thing with no level and no species, the spirit that no attack can touch and no ball can hold. In the original games, there is a second solution, and it does not involve the Sylph scope at all. You can open your bag and use a Pokédoll. A Pokédoll is a small stuffed toy sold in the department store in Celadon City, 3 floors up, in the section with the souvenirs. It costs almost nothing. Its function in battle is to let you escape from a wild encounter without fail, because you throw it down, and the wild Pokémon becomes interested in it, and you walk away while it is distracted. And it works on her. Throw a stuffed animal at the spirit of a murdered mother standing on the stairs of a graveyard, and she stops. The ghost that psychic and physical force cannot touch, that technology cannot name, that stopped Mr. Fuji, is diverted by a child's plaything from a department store shelf. Now, the mechanical explanation is straightforward and slightly disappointing. The ghost is internally a wild encounter, and Pokédolls end wild encounters, and the code does not care that this particular wild encounter is a bereaved spirit. It is a quirk of implementation, fine. But sit inside the fiction for a moment, because the fiction that quirk produces is unbelievable. A mother is killed. Her child takes her skull and wanders off into the fields. Her spirit travels across the region to a graveyard tower and stations itself on a staircase, and it stands there for as long as it takes, unreachable, unmeasurable, screaming at anything that approaches, because the last thing it understood was that something was coming for its child. And the thing that gets past her is not a weapon, it is a toy. You put down a small, soft imitation of a Pokémon in front of her, and she stops, and something in whatever is left of her turns toward it, and you walk up the stairs behind her while she is looking at it. I do not think there is a more quietly devastating image in the entire franchise, and it exists by accident, and the players who found it in 1998 traded it as a shortcut. Skip the sylph scope. Just bring a doll. And then the franchise, 8 years later, built an entire Pokémon out of exactly that idea, and I do not believe for a second that it was unrelated. Banette. A discarded plush toy that came to life through resentment. The entries say that a doll that was thrown away by the child who loved it became so bitter that it began to move, and that it wanders in the night looking for that child, and that it curses people by driving pins into itself. It has a zipper for a mouth, holding something in. And in one of the entries there is a line that tells you why the pins do not fall out, which is that the doll's own emotions keep them there. So the world of Pokémon contains a species born from an abandoned toy's grief, and in a tower in Kanto, a toy is the object that pacifies a mother's ghost. Both of those exist. Both are official. And they describe the same relationship from the two opposite ends, which is that in this world, the objects children love become vessels, and the loved thing and the grieving thing are made of the same material. Which brings me to Mewtwo, because we left something on Cinnabar Island, and it did not stay there. The diaries end with a line about failing to curb its violent tendencies, and the mansion is a burned shell, and the question of where it went has one of the most striking answers in the first generation, and almost nothing in the games points you to it. You have to go looking. North of Cerulean City, past the bridge where 5 trainers wait in a line, there is a lake. And in the rock face beside that lake there is an entrance. And if you have every badge in Kanto, and have already beaten the champion, the guard who once blocked that entrance is gone. Inside is the place the original games called the Unknown Dungeon, and later games called Cerulean Cave, and it is unlike anything else in the region. Every other cave in Kanto is a route. Mount Moon is a path from Pewter to Cerulean, with a scientist in it and fossils to pick up. Rock Tunnel is a shortcut to Lavender that is dark until you light it. Diglett's Cave is a tunnel with a purpose. Even Victory Road is a corridor with an exit at the end of it, because the whole point of Victory Road is that it leads somewhere. Cerulean Cave leads nowhere. It has 3 floors of water and stone, with no exit at the far end, no town beyond it, no item that the story requires, and no reason for a trainer to enter it except one. And it contains the highest level wild Pokémon in the entire region by a wide margin, not slightly higher. The population inside that cave is stronger than the Elite Four. There are Golbat, and Magneton, and Ditto, and Wobbuffet, and Rhydon, and Electrode at levels that make no ecological sense compared to anything on the surface. And the deeper you go, the worse it gets, and none of it can leave, and none of it appears to want to. At the bottom, alone, on the far side of a water crossing, there is a creature sitting on the stone floor at level 70. Mewtwo does not roam. It does not fly through the region terrorizing towns. It went into a hole in the ground beside a lake north of a city, and it sat down there, in the dark, surrounded by things that had grown wrong in its presence, and it stayed, for years, until a child arrived. That is the ending of the Cinnabar Diaries, and nobody in Kanto ever wrote it down. The most powerful engineered organism in the world, whose creation may have been overseen by the same man who now tends graves in Lavender Town, chose to live in the darkest unvisited place in the region, and the only official acknowledgement of its existence anywhere in the games is 4 lines of research notes lying on the floor of a burned building on an island. And the cave it chose is worth one more thought, because that ecosystem is telling you something. Everything in Cerulean Cave is over-leveled. Every species in there is stronger than its counterparts anywhere else in Kanto. There is a psychic creature of enormous power sitting at the bottom of that cave, radiating whatever it radiates, and the animals in the tunnels above it have become something the rest of the region's wildlife is not. Proximity changes things. That is the lesson of that cave, and it is the lesson of Darkrai's Island, and it is the lesson of the Pokémon Tower, and it is the lesson of the old chateau in the forest. And the town of Lavender built its memorial on a hill and staffed it with people who stand still and open themselves up, and then the region put a criminal research operation in the building, and the residents said, in the plainest words the localization could manage, that the ghosts had been getting worse recently. Now, come with me to Unova, because there is a burial site there that I have not mentioned, and it is the most literal one in the entire franchise. In the desert north of Castelia, in a place called the Desert Resort, where the sand blows so thickly that your view of the ground is permanently obscured, There is a structure sunk into the dunes called the Relic Castle. It is a ruin, mostly buried, and the deeper you go, the more it becomes a tomb rather than a building. And in that tomb are the Yamask, the ones carrying their own human faces in their hands. And their evolution is Cofagrigus, and Cofagrigus is a sarcophagus. Not a creature that lives in a sarcophagus. The Pokémon is the coffin, gold, ornamented, with a lid and a face on the front, and 4 shadowy arms with hands that emerge from the sides. The entries are explicit, and they are among the worst in the encyclopedia. They say that Cofagrigus is often mistaken for an ordinary golden sarcophagus by tomb robbers, and that when a robber attempts to take it, it seizes them. They say that there are Cofagrigus who have swallowed human beings, and that those humans became mummies inside them. And there is an entry that suggests the 4 shadowy hands are not part of the coffin at all, but belong to the 4 people it has already taken. A coffin that eats the people who try to steal it, and whose arms are its victims. So Unova's contribution to this subject is a desert full of dead humans who became Pokémon, and a species of animate coffin that has consumed grave robbers, sitting in a buried castle where the sand hides your feet. And Kanto, for comparison, has a tower with a desk on the first floor, and a shop counter, and volunteers who will tell you where to go. I keep coming back to that contrast, because it is the thing that makes Lavender Town frightening in a completely different register from every other dark location in this franchise. The Relic Castle is scary the way a monster is scary. The old chateau is scary the way an empty house is scary. Mount Pyre is not scary at all. It is beautiful and sad and windy. The Pokémon Tower is scary the way a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning is scary. Which is to say, it is scary because it is organized. Somebody made a schedule. Somebody assigned floors. Somebody decided how many graves fit on a level, and where the stairs should go, and who staffs the desk. And the building has been running that way for generations. And the thing it is organized around is the fact that the dead are still here. And then there is Johto, and Johto has the one story in the whole franchise that goes further than any of this, because Johto has a fire. In Ecruteak City, in the northeast of that region, there are 2 towers. There were 2 towers, rather, and their history is the most complete death and return narrative the series has ever told. One tower still stands, tall and white, and it is called the Bell Tower or the Tin Tower, depending on the version. It rises above the city, and something enormous is said to have once perched at the top of it, a bird of gold and red and green, and the people of the city built the tower for it, and it came, and the city prospered. The other tower burned. 300 years ago, according to the story every resident of Ecruteak will tell you, lightning struck the second tower, and it caught fire and burned for 3 days, and the rain came and put it out. And when the smoke cleared, the building was a blackened shell, and it has never been repaired. It is still there. You can walk into it. The floor has holes in it, and you fall through them into a basement that nobody has cleaned in 3 centuries. And 3 Pokémon died in that fire. That is the part of the story people forget, because the sentence usually gets summarized as a legend. 3 Pokémon were inside the tower when it burned, and they were killed, not defeated, killed. 3 unnamed creatures, ordinary enough that the story does not record what they were, died in a burning building in a city 300 years ago. And then the bird came back. Ho-Oh, from the other tower, descended into the ruin, and the legend says it resurrected them, and the 3 that rose out of the ashes were not what they had been. They came back as something else. Raikou, with thunder in it, said to have the speed of lightning. Entei, with the heat of the fire that killed it, said to have been born from the eruption of a volcano in some tellings. And Suicune, purified, associated with the north wind, and with water so clean that it makes any spring it passes fit to drink. 3 ordinary animals died in a fire, and a god came down and brought them back as legendaries, and now they run. That is their entire behavior. All 3 of them roam. They do not settle anywhere, they do not have a lair, they move constantly across an entire region and cannot be found in any fixed location, and if you encounter one, it will flee in a single turn, unless you have specifically prepared to prevent it. They have never stopped running from that building. And here is why that story belongs in a video about Lavender Town, because it answers the question that the Pokémon Tower asks and never answers. In Kanto, the dead stay dead, and the region built a 7-story filing cabinet for them, and hired mediums to receive whatever refused to be filed, and when a spirit became too loud, a child had to go up and put it to rest with a lens and a battle. In Johto, 300 years ago, in a city with a tower for a god, 3 things died and were brought back, and the way the region commemorates it is that the burned building is left exactly as it fell, unrepaired, with holes in the floor, in the middle of a living city, a short walk from a dance theater and a gym. 2 regions, joined by a train line, with 2 completely opposite doctrines about what happens after. Kanto's answer is a graveyard and a promise not to forget. Johto's answer is a scorched ruin that nobody has swept, and 3 resurrected animals that have been running for 3 centuries, and a bell in the surviving tower that still gets rung. And the games let you walk from one to the other in about 40 minutes. That is the thing about this world that I do not think anybody has fully reckoned with, and it is the largest unsolved mystery of all of them. Larger than the syndrome, larger than the skull, larger than the man with 2 names. In the world of Pokémon, there is no agreed-upon account of death. Every region has its own. They contradict each other completely. They are all apparently correct, and nobody in the setting has ever noticed the contradiction. Sinnoh says there is a reverse world, where a god of antimatter watches the departed. Unova says people become masks and coffins, and there is a bell you can ring to soothe them. Alola says the dead dance with fire in a municipal cemetery, and there are guardian deities in each island's ruins. Hoenn says you lay them on a mountainside and let the wind have them. Johto says a bird can bring 3 of them back if it feels like it, and that graves are optional, but the ruin should stay standing. Kalos says a machine can force life back into a dead thing if you feed it enough other lives, and that the thing that comes back will never forgive you. And Kanto says nothing at all. Kanto builds a tower, writes small names on small stones, hires an old man and some volunteers, and a group of unregulated mediums, puts a sign at the edge of town that mentions only the color purple, and gets on with the business of raising 10-year-olds to be champions. 6 answers, 1 region without one, and no scholar anywhere in that world has ever put them side by side. And if you want the single most frightening entry ever printed in an official Pokémon product, it is not in Kanto at all. It is a candle. Litwick. A small white candle with a wax body and a purple flame and a face. And it looks like something you would put on a birthday cake. The entries say that it pretends to be a guide, that it appears to travelers who are lost in the dark and leads them, and that people follow it gratefully, because a light in the dark is the most trustworthy thing there is. And they say that while it leads, it is absorbing the life force of the person following it, and that the flame on its head burns by consuming that life, and that it leads them not to safety but into the world of the spirits. A creature that shows you the way out and is eating you while it does it. Then Lampent, its evolution, a lamp instead of a candle, and this is the one that made a generation of players stop reading the encyclopedia for a while. The entries say Lampent is drawn to towns and cities, and that it lingers near hospitals. It waits, they say, for the moment a person is about to pass away, and when they do, it takes the departing spirit and burns it as fuel. Not the body, not the memory. The spirit itself, taken at the moment of departure, burned for light. And then Chandelure, a full chandelier, ornate, the kind that hangs in the ceiling of a grand old house. And the entry says that being consumed by its flames does not kill you in the ordinary sense. It says the victim's spirit is burned away, and that what is left wanders forever in this world, without a body, unable to move on. Read that again slowly, because there is a category of horror in that sentence that almost nothing in fiction attempts. Chandelure does not kill people. It strands them. Its fire destroys the part of a person that would otherwise go somewhere, and what remains is stuck here, indefinitely, without a form. And where do chandeliers hang? They hang in old mansions with abandoned dining rooms. They hang in the ballrooms of houses, in forests that nobody will discuss. In the world of Pokémon, the ornate light fixture on the ceiling of a beautiful empty house may be a living creature whose diet is the souls of the people who used to live there, and whose leftovers are still in the building, formless, unable to leave. Go back to the old chateau in Eterna Forest with that in your mind. The fully furnished mansion in the woods, with the cutlery still on the table and nobody inside it, with a face that appears in a television screen, and a girl who stands at the end of a hallway and is not there when the text box closes. Nothing in the games says a Chandelure ever lived in the old chateau, but the games gave us a house that emptied without explanation, and then, 2 generations later, gave us the mechanism by which a house empties. That is how this franchise builds its horror, and it has been doing it patiently for 30 years. It does not explain. It provides the pieces in different decades and different regions, and lets you assemble them at 1 in the morning when you should be asleep. And the pieces keep coming. That same generation gave us Yamask carrying its own face, and Kofagrigus swallowing tomb robbers, and a burial desert, and a graveyard tower with a bell at the top. And the generation after that, in Kalos, went further still, because Kalos is where the franchise stopped implying and started stating. Kalos has Phantump and Trevenant, the dead children who became the forest. It has Pumpkaboo, a small hollowed pumpkin with a light inside it, and the entries say it carries the spirits of the wandering dead, and that it is a vessel for them, and that it becomes restless as darkness falls and moves toward the place where spirits belong. It has Gorgeist, its evolution, which sings on moonless nights and whose song is described as a curse, and whose arrival at a home is said to be an omen. It has Honedge, a sword with an eye and a cloth arm, and the entry says that if you take hold of the hilt, the cloth wraps your arm and drains your life away, and that people have died from picking it up. It has Aegislash at the end of that line, and the entry says it has the ability to detect the qualities of a leader, and that it has served kings and generals throughout history, and that whoever wields it becomes a ruler. A sword that chooses monarchs and drains the life of anyone unworthy who touches it, in the same region where a king built a machine to resurrect a flower and destroyed 2 armies with the exhaust. And Kalos, in the middle of all that, gave us the one story in this world where somebody actually beat death, and the reason I have saved it until now is that it is the exact mirror of Lavender Town, and once you see the two side by side, you understand what the tower is for. 3,000 years ago, there was a king. His kingdom was beautiful, full of art and invention and gardens, and there was a war, and he had a companion. A small floette, a fairy holding a flower, and it went into the fighting to shield him, and it was killed. And he could not accept it. So he built a weapon, and the weapon's purpose was to convert life into energy, and to obtain the life he needed, he fed it the fallen, Pokémon and soldiers alike, and when it was charged, he turned it on the thing he loved, and forced it back into the world. And it worked. That is what makes the story unbearable. It worked. The floette opened its eyes and came back and stood up, and the king had his companion again, and the price had already been paid by everyone else. And then it walked away from him. That is the ending. The resurrected thing looked at what had been done in its name, at the fields of ash and the 2 annihilated armies, and the machine still humming underneath the palace, and it left him, and it never came back. And because the machine's energy had also gone into him, he did not age, and he did not die, and he has spent 3,000 years walking. He is still walking. You can meet him. He is an enormously tall man in a modern city in Kalos, and he is very old and very quiet, and he is still looking. Now put that beside Mr. Fuji. 2 men in 2 regions, separated by 3,000 years and about 400 kilometers, who each refused to accept a death. One built a weapon and got what he wanted and lost everything else. The other, if the theory about the diaries is true, built a laboratory and got almost what he wanted, and what he got was a child made of copied cells who faded in a tank, and a second child in the next tank who watched it happen and grew up to be the most powerful creature on Earth. And what did they both do afterward? They walked. One of them has been walking across Kalos for 30 centuries. The other one walked to a small purple town in eastern Kanto, built a shelter for orphaned Pokémon beside the largest graveyard in the region, and spent his remaining years filling water bowls and climbing 7 flights of stairs to sit vigil at the top of a tower. That is the whole moral architecture of this franchise in one comparison, and it has never been stated out loud in any game. The 2 men who tried to defeat death both ended up as caretakers. One cares for a memory. The other cares for the ones nobody came back for. And the tower is what a society builds instead of a weapon. That is the answer, I think, to the biggest question of the night, the one underneath all the mysteries. Why did Kanto build a 7-story graveyard in a town of 6 houses and staff it with volunteers and let unregulated mediums stand in the dark on the 3rd floor? Because the alternative is Kalos. The alternative is a machine under a palace, and a beam across the horizon, and a resurrected flower that will not look at you. Every culture in this world has had to decide what to do with the unbearable fact that the creatures who sleep at the foot of the bed do not live as long as we do. And the choices available are to build something that gets them back, or to build something that holds them. Kanto built the thing that holds them. 7 floors, small stones, small names, a desk on the ground floor, and a sign at the entrance that mentions only a color and a compliment, because the town does not need to explain itself to anyone who has already made the climb up the hill. And that, finally, brings me to the last set of doors, and they are the ones that are still locked, and I want to lay them out clearly before the night goes on, because these are the questions that have never been answered by anybody, in any interview, in any game, in any generation, and which may never be. Who built the Pokémon Tower? Nobody knows. It is older than anyone in the town. No character mentions its construction. No plaque records a founder. No organization claims it. The largest memorial in Kanto has no recorded architect, no date, and no owner. Who staffs it? There is no institution behind the channelers, and there never was. There is no order, no training, no oversight, and no explanation for why they congregate in that building, and in Sabrina's gym, and nowhere else on Earth. Who invented the Sylph scope? And what did they see through it while they were calibrating it? And where are those notes? What happened to the man on the top floor? 3 years later, he is simply not there, and the town's memorial has a different keeper, and nobody in Kanto says his name. Whether he was ever the doctor from the island, the diaries are unsigned, the film gives a name, the main series has never joined them, and the silence is now so old that it has become part of the character. Why the ghosts got worse. A resident says it in plain text, and the game never returns to it, and the timeline of Kanto's own crimes lines up with the escalation so neatly that the coincidence is the most persuasive piece of evidence in the entire case. What the Rockets were doing on the 7th floor, having first acquired the region's only ghost detection instrument, 3 years before the same organization seized a broadcast tower and used it to reach living creatures through the air. Why a transmitter was built on the site of the graves, where the skull comes from, all of them, every cubone in every region, in every generation, and not one of them has ever been documented before it put the helmet on. What the child in the pouch is. What a cubone's face looks like. Nobody in that world has ever seen it. Not a professor, not a researcher, not a trainer who raised one from a hatchling and loved it for years. The encyclopedia has an entry for the tear stains on the inside of the bone, and no entry at all for the face behind it. And the last one, which is the one that stays with me longest, and which the games ask by omission rather than by asking, whether the Marowak on the 6th floor was the only one. Because she had a reason to be there, and we know what it was. She had a name, in the sense that the Sylph scope could eventually give her a species, and she had a story, told in 4 lines by a boy in a house at the bottom of the hill, and she had a child, and she had an ending, gentle in its wording, the spirit was put to rest. And she was standing on the stairs of a building with 7 floors and generations of graves, in a region where the dead demonstrably persist, in a world where a coffin can eat a man, and a chandelier can strand a soul, and a lamp can wait outside a hospital for the moment of departure. She was not the only thing in that tower, she was just the one who got in the way. So let us walk back down the hill one last time, and let the town be quiet. It is very late in Lavender now. The houses have gone dark one by one, the way houses do in small places, without ceremony, a window at a time. The Poke Center still glows, because those buildings never close, and its red roof holds the last of the light like a coal. The PokeSmart's shutter is down. Down on Route 12, the sea moves against the pilings in the same slow rhythm it has kept for as long as anyone in this town has been alive, and the wooden platforms creak, and the fishermen have gone home, and somewhere out on that water a tentacle drifts without any particular destination. And the tower stands over all of it. 7 floors. A desk on the ground floor where somebody sits during the day and answers questions from people who have arrived carrying something small in a box. Rows of stones on the 2nd floor, and the 3rd, and the 4th, and the 5th, arranged in patterns you can walk between, small names on them, Rattata, Pidgey, Nidoran, beloved friend, faithful partner, rest in peace. The plainest possible words, chosen by people who could not think of anything grander and did not need to. Mediums standing in the dark in white robes on the middle floors, perfectly still, facing the graves, doing the only thing anyone in Kanto knows how to do about any of this, which is to remain in place and pay attention. And higher up, on the 6th floor, the staircase where she stood. She is not there now. That is worth saying plainly, at the end, because we have spent a long night on the things this town cannot explain, and it would be easy to leave you with the impression that the story has no ending. It has one. It is small, and it is quiet, and it consists of 4 words in a text box on a Game Boy screen. The Marowak's spirit was put to rest. Somebody climbed those stairs. Somebody found the lens in the basement of a casino on the other side of the region and brought it back and used it, and looked at the thing that could not be named, and named it, and then did the hard part, which was not the battle, because the battle is trivial. The hard part was standing there afterward, on an empty staircase, in a dark building, understanding what had just been released, and what she had been guarding, and how long she had been guarding it, and that the child she died for was outside, in the grass at that moment, wearing her, crying into her, and would never be told any of this. And then that person climbed one more flight and found an old man sitting on the floor of the highest room, who had gone up there alone, with nothing but the intention to be present, and brought him home. And the old man went into his little house and came back out with a flute, and used it to solve nothing at all except a road closure, and did not explain where he got it, and was never asked. That is the whole story of Lavender Town. Everything else that has been built on top of it, the syndrome, the frequencies, the spectrograms, the white hand that drags you through the floor, the boy who follows you in a bootleg cartridge, all of it is scaffolding that people put up around a very small and very tender thing, because the tender thing was too quiet to look at directly. And I do not think the scaffolding is a crime. I have come to think it is a kind of respect, misdirected. 30 years of people who could not stop thinking about a purple town on a hill, filling in its silences, the only way human beings have ever known how to fill a silence, which is with a story told after dark to somebody who cannot sleep. Which is, more or less, what we have been doing tonight. So here is the last thought, and then I will let you go. The name of that town, in the language it was written in first, is the name of a flower that blooms in late autumn, after almost everything else has finished. A pale purple aster, coming up out of cold ground when the season is already over, and in the old language of flowers, the quiet code that has been used for centuries to say things too heavy to say out loud, that flower carries one meaning. I will not forget you. Not a warning, not a curse, not a hidden frequency, or an erased record, or a hand on a shoulder in the dark. A promise made by a town so small you can cross it in a minute, to a room full of Rattata and Pidgey and Nidoran, and to a mother who came all that way to stand on a staircase, and to whatever else has gathered on that hill since, and to an old man whose name appears twice in the record, and who nobody in the second generation seems to remember. The town kept the promise. That is the mystery and the answer at the same time. Every haunting in that building is the sound of a promise being kept a little too well. And that is where we will leave it. The hill in the dark, the sea working at the pilings down on Route 12. The last light going out in the Poké Center, 7 floors of small stones and small names, and the wind coming through the gap at the top of the stairs, and somewhere out in the tall grass beyond the edge of town, the soft hollow knock of a bone helmet against the ground, going quiet, and then quieter, and then not at all. Sleep well. Thank you for spending tonight with us, in the noble purple town, where nothing is ever really forgotten. And whenever you're ready, we'll be here again tomorrow night, with another story from the dark corners of this world, told slowly, for as long as it takes you to drift off. Good night.